Web novels and web novel audiobooks are not the same. If you simply copy and paste a web novel into an audiobook format, the final result will provide a poor listening experience. That's why I carefully revise every single chapter in this novel to ensure an enjoyable and immersive experience for you. I go through multiple rounds of rewriting and listening to make sure the narration flows naturally, almost as if you were reading it out loud yourself. This is not just a direct copy of the original novel. However, I do acknowledge that I adapted this novel for commercial purposes, so most chapters are paid content. I hope you understand that this does not violate copyright policies. The reason I do all of this is simple: I'm just a big fan. As many of you know, I love listening to web novel audiobooks, and this is one of my personal favorites. The audio speed is set to 3, but if that feels too fast, let me know. If there's a novel you'd like me to turn into an audiobook, feel free to suggest it, and I'll do my best to make it happen. Thank you for your support. Chapter 1, Filler. To speak of the New World is to speak of the most treacherous sea in the entire Grand Line. No, it's more accurate to say it's the most dangerous sea area in the entire world. The ocean here is turbulent and volatile, with bizarre phenomena occurring on a daily basis. Sailing through this region is an unparalleled experience. In the New World, no matter how experienced a veteran might be, death can come at any moment. After all, everything in this place shatters the understanding of even the most seasoned navigators. Whether it's an island suspended in the sky, or a sea suddenly splitting open, or a sudden hailstorm larger than ships under a clear blue sky. In short, no matter what unimaginable event you think of, the New World can make it happen. Even if the ocean surface abruptly transforms into boiling magma that consumes everything, it's nothing out of the ordinary here. And the sea is fair in its ruthlessness. It does not discriminate, regardless of who you are: pirate, marine, adventurer, noble, or merchant. It doesn't matter. To the sea, every identity is equal, for you are all its children. Currently, in the waters near the entrance of the New World, on an unnamed island, there exists a man who has lived even after he should have died. To speak of living here is not quite accurate. It would be more appropriate to say that this man had already died once, only for his body to be taken over by a soul from another world, beginning a new journey. At this moment, on the shore of this desolate island, a youth who appeared to be in his teens stood. His body was plump, dressed in tattered clothing that still retained an air of former elegance. His pale blonde hair was long, his face imposing despite his swollen features, his skin morbidly fair. At a glance, anyone could tell that this young man was no ordinary person. He seemed like one of those idle, inept nobles, one who knew nothing of hardship or labor. A person whose life consisted of nothing but eating, drinking, and waiting for death. Indeed, this young man possessed an extraordinary background. If one were to ask whether there existed anyone in the world who, from the moment of birth to their inevitable demise, enjoyed absolute privilege and authority, whose power and wealth were unmatched, the answer would be yes. Such beings did exist. They are known as celestial dragons, referred to as the nobles of the world. To discuss the nobles of the world, we must delve into an event that occurred 800 years ago. It is said that 800 years ago, the royal families of 20 kingdoms banded together to form a new regime with the goal of establishing a new world order, the world government. Since then, this world government has ruled the entire globe for 800 years. During this period, the descendants of those 20 kings were given illustrious titles like the descendants of the Creator or the descendants of the gods. These descendants are collectively known as the celestial dragons, the true nobles of the world. The celestial dragons are the living embodiment of the world government, as it was their ancestors who established it. Moreover, the highest levels of authority in the world government have always been held by the most powerful celestial dragons. Thus, over the past 800 years, the status of the celestial dragons has been constantly elevated. Now, they enjoy privileges and powers that ordinary people can never dream of reaching. To illustrate this, let's use the simplest example: a Marine Admiral, the highest rank in the Marines, second only to the Fleet Admiral. Such a person would be regarded as a figure of great stature, influence, and power across the world. This person could authorize a buster call to condemn an entire island as criminal and erase its existence from the map. Their strength is among the top tier in this world. While they may not necessarily be the absolute strongest, they undoubtedly rank among the elite. And yet, such a figure, a Marine Admiral, in the presence of a celestial dragon, is merely a bodyguard. Yes, the celestial dragons are so exalted that whether it's the Marines, who rule the seas, or the enigmatic Cypher Pol Agents organizations, they are merely the celestial dragon's servants. Offending a celestial dragon is an offense that demands retribution at the highest level. The Marine Headquarters and Cypher Pol Agents organizations must do everything in their power to maintain the dignity of the celestial dragons. That is to say, should something happen to a celestial dragon, a Marine Admiral level figure must personally intervene to clean up the mess. This world is so unreasonably structured. It is because of this absurdity that the celestial dragons have continued to elevate themselves over the past 800 years, viewing everything beneath them as mere dust. To them, only their own kind, the celestial dragons, are considered people. The rest are merely slaves. Their arrogance and disdain for others have reached such an extreme that they wear bubble hoods out of sheer self-importance, simply because they do not want to breathe the same air as the common untouchables. Though it may seem ludicrous, this custom illustrates the pride and arrogance of the celestial dragons in the most blatant manner. At this moment, the chubby youth sitting on a rock by the shore of this unnamed island was none other than a celestial dragon of the most distinguished rank. Don Quixote Claudius. What a domineering name, but the person himself is a bit of an idiot, no. The plump youth muttered as he sat on a rock, continually criticizing his predecessor. Yes, he was a member of the Don Quixote family, an authentic celestial dragon. 800 years ago, the Don Quixote family was the royal family of Dressrosa. After forming the world government, the family moved from Dressrosa to the Holy Land of Mage, becoming one of the 19 remaining celestial dragon families. Yes, 19. Among the 20 kings' descendants, the royal family of Alabasta, the Nefertari family, chose not to relocate to Mage, thus refraining from becoming celestial dragons. Instead, over the course of 800 years, they have come to be seen as mere provincial lords in the eyes of the celestial dragons. Nonetheless, the Nefertari family still holds a measure of respect in Mage and within the world government. In short, this chubby youth is a member of the Don Quixote family. From a familial standpoint, one could say he is the big cousin of the future pirate overlord, heavenly demon Don Quixote da Flamengo, older by a few years. As for the name Claudius, it might not mean much in this world, but Claudius knows very well that this name carries the legacy of a certain Roman emperor, a name signifying power and might. Holding a wooden stick in his hand, Don Quixote Claudius scratched out a few lines on the sand, muttering to himself, "First things first, let's get a clear picture of my current situation. To start, the first point is that this idiot of a predecessor somehow ended up eating a devil fruit. I can't change that, but at least it's a Logia type. With my excellent brain, I shouldn't be as hopeless as that idiot, right?" Claudius murmured softly. Yes, his foolish predecessor, despite being a noble celestial dragon, had somehow been tricked into eating a devil fruit. While it was indeed a Logia-type fruit, it still highlighted his predecessor's sheer stupidity. Naturally, if the present Claudius possessed the same inexplicable sense of nobility as the current celestial dragons, he would rather throw a powerful devil fruit to the slaves as a toy than use it to enhance his own strength. But that's not who he is. Yes, Claudius is a far more pragmatic person. He does not subscribe to these so-called feudal beliefs. Moreover, having arrived in the world of One Piece, how could he not relish the opportunity to experience the sensation of wielding devil fruit powers and the extraordinary mysteries they entail? Thus, if his predecessor hadn't foolishly consumed a devil fruit, Claudius would still have dreamed of developing something like the thunder fruit to play with. But now it seemed that dream could no longer be realized. What a pity. The second point is that Claudius, or rather, I, am a celestial dragon. No wonder this body is so fat, bloated, and utterly wasted. It really puts a damper on my own handsome soul. Claudius shook his head helplessly and looked at his reflection in the fluctuating tide, sighing at the state of his own body. Understanding the situation of being a celestial dragon, especially a lower tier one like Claudius, is straightforward. The world government is a massive organization that has maintained world order for 800 years. It's not possible for all celestial dragons to be mindless idiots like Claudius. While all celestial dragons share the same noble bloodline, they are divided into upper and lower classes. To use the simplest analogy, consider the 5 elders, the highest power holders in the world government. The 5 elders are also celestial dragons, but they are of the highest order. Individuals like them are vastly different from the trash like Claudius. They possess sharp minds, abundant experience, and serve as the steering wheel of the world government's ship. In addition to the highest-ranking celestial dragons, there are also the middle and upper celestial dragons, those who hold leadership positions within the celestial dragon families or possess some capability of their own. These individuals can be regarded as power holders within the celestial dragon's social hierarchy, wielding some measure of authority and a more normal state of mind. Finally, there are those like Claudius, the lowest-tier celestial dragons, who are mere parasites, content to eat, drink, and waste away. After examining his appearance reflected in the ebb and flow of the tide, Claudius touched his chin for a moment, finally nodding with a hint of self-satisfaction and vanity. From a foundational perspective, there's potential. If I can change this temperament and transform this body, I should be able to match this skin with my truly handsome soul. The original Claudius was a textbook example of a lower-tier celestial dragon, existing only to eat, drink, and wait for death. He lacked any awareness or motivation to take care of his physical appearance. Overindulgence and laziness had turned him into a repulsive dead fat slob. But if one were to look past these acquired factors and consider the underlying natural foundation, Claudius could indeed become quite good-looking. After all, the celestial dragons, despite their flaws, have a decent standard of aesthetics. Whenever they saw someone beautiful, they would often marry them, adding these individuals to their collection of wives. This proves, at the very least, that their aesthetic sense is not skewed. Moreover, these nobles of the world have been consuming the finest foods and enjoying the best of life for 800 years, which means their genes remain quite strong. As such, very few among them grow up to be hideously ugly. Most of their unpleasant appearances are the result of excessive indulgence and the absence of restraint. In conclusion, Claudius felt that if he could put in the effort to control this body's excessive desires, lose weight, and shake off the inherent greasiness, he should be able to transform into a handsome man. After all, his cousin, Don Quixote da Flamengo, would become quite a dashing figure in the future, at least much more attractive than most celestial dragons in merry Ijos. In Claudius's opinion, this was largely due to da Flamengo's unique growth environment. If da Flamengo had stayed in merry Ijos, merely existing as a celestial dragon, he probably would have ended up the same as the others, physically and mentally decayed. Lastly, the reason why Claudius, my predecessor, ended up shipwrecked and stranded on this island is clearly due to some conspiracy. After all, by all rights, I should have already been dead, Claudius murmured softly, a complicated light flashing in his eyes. Chapter 2, My predecessor was mentally deficient? As the saying goes, where there are people, there are conflicts. The same principle applies to the celestial dragons in the holy land of merry Ijos. Celestial dragons don't bother competing with ordinary untouchables because they have no need to contend with such lowly beings. Anything they desire, they can simply take. To the celestial dragons, they are inherently superior. There is no need to fight because the untouchables wouldn't dare to oppose them. Could any low-born commoner truly dare to rob a celestial dragon? Therefore, conflicts among celestial dragons are usually restricted to their own class. Only those with equal nobility are considered their rivals. If you were to recount Don Quixote Claudius's experiences, it would sound like a bad soap opera filled with absurdity and irony. Don't let his status as a low-level celestial dragon fool you. His parents were once quite influential. They were the original heads of the Don Quixote family, making Claudius, by birthright, a true second-generation celestial dragon. But as fate would have it, life is unpredictable, and disasters strike even those who consider themselves gods. In the end, the celestial dragons are merely human, subject to the same cycle of birth, aging, sickness, and death. Claudius's parents died 3 years ago from an incurable illness. At that time, Claudius was just 7 years old, far too young to assume his father's position as the head of the Don Quixote family. With no one to take up the mantle, control of the family fell to da Flamengo's father, Don Quixote Homing. Homing was an anomaly among the celestial dragons. He was kind-hearted and lacked the malicious intentions typical of his kind. He treated the young Claudius with genuine care, raising him like his own son over the past 3 years. If nothing unusual had occurred, Claudius would have continued to grow up under Homing's care, living a life of luxury and indulgence until adulthood, where he could simply laze about like the rest of the useless celestial dragons, enjoying all that the world had to offer. What more could a wasteful celestial dragon want? However, according to Claudius's memories, Homing had even planned to return the position of family patriarch to Claudius once he reached adulthood. If I think about it, living such an unproductive life while still enjoying everything the world has to offer. It doesn't sound half bad, does it? Claudius murmured with a wry smile. It has to be said, living such a life would indeed be quite pleasant. No need to struggle, no need to face unpleasant matters. But therein lies the problem. For some reason, there seems to be an inexplicable idealistic trait buried deep within the Don Quixote lineage, causing 1 or 2 problematic individuals to appear every so often. In Claudius's view, these people are mentally deficient, those who cannot comprehend reality. And, to make matters worse, Don Quixote Homing, the current head of the Don Quixote family, is exactly one of these individuals. Over the past year or so, perhaps due to a trip he took with his wife and children to the North Pole where he witnessed the world's true state, Homing's idealistic trait had been fully triggered. A prominent patriarch of the Holy Land merry Ijos, a great man among celestial dragons, was now experiencing a sort of mental lapse. Every so often, he entertained the bizarre idea that he didn't want to be a celestial dragon anymore. He wanted to be an ordinary man living in the lower realms with the common folk. Within the celestial dragon class, such thoughts are considered outright lunacy, the very epitome of mental sickness. Worse yet, after contemplating this fantasy for a year, Homing hadn't discarded the notion. Instead, he was more convinced that this was the path he should follow. As the saying goes, longing is the furthest distance from understanding. Homing, Fixated on the simple life of ordinary people, believed it to be carefree and fulfilling. He dreamt of living a life of farming and simplicity, never once considering the harsh realities of such a lifestyle. It was truly a classic example of the naive perspective of those who live above the world's struggles. After all, how could a celestial dragon, born at the pinnacle of the world, possibly understand the hardships of the common people? It was the same as if a king told a starving peasant, "Why don't you eat meat instead?" Due to this delusional fantasy, over the past year, Homing had begun making arrangements to create a fallback plan for the Don Quixote family. As the current head of the Don Quixote family, Homing did have some sense of responsibility. He wasn't planning to simply disappear and leave everything behind. Instead, he began organizing the handover of the family's power and wealth. During this process, the previously inconspicuous Claudius suddenly found himself in a very unfortunate position. Despite his status as a useless waste, Claudius was still the legitimate heir of the Don Quixote family according to both law and bloodline. And among the celestial dragons, lineage is everything. It's the fundamental basis upon which their entire power structure and class system are built. Thus, when Homing prepared to relinquish his position as head of the family, Claudius was naturally pushed into the spotlight. Homing sincerely intended to return the leadership of the Don Quixote family to Claudius. Claudius, in his former state of blissful ignorance, had no sense of the danger and eagerly accepted the arrangement, completely oblivious to the storm brewing around him. Thinking back on it now, Claudius felt utterly speechless. His predecessor was truly a naive and incompetent fool. He didn't even stop to consider that, beyond having a more legitimate bloodline, he had absolutely no qualifications to become the head of the Don Quixote family. First of all, there was his age. Was everyone else in the Don Quixote family dead? Why else would they need a 10-year-old child to become their leader? Secondly, due to his youth and the early death of his parents, Homing, being the kind-hearted simpleton that he was, had not left Claudius with any capable supporters or advisors. Thus, in terms of power and influence, Claudius had absolutely no foundation. He was just a worthless, powerless child. If Claudius had been a genius, someone who showed promise and potential, perhaps the other celestial dragons might have tolerated his leadership, albeit reluctantly, in the hopes that he could elevate the Don Quixote family to new heights in the future. But the former Claudius was a true idiot, someone who could accomplish nothing except eat, sleep, and waste away. So, what did the rest of the Don Quixote family think? With a mediocre brat like Claudius leading them, it wouldn't be long before the once prestigious Don Quixote family fell to the bottom of the 19 celestial dragon families. Thus, for the sake of both the family's honor and their own power, everyone with a shred of intelligence within the Don Quixote family secretly opposed the idea of Claudius becoming the family's head. Claudius understood this sentiment perfectly now. If it had been up to him, he wouldn't have chosen such a waste to be the head of the family either. But that idealist Homing couldn't see the truth. He believed that returning the family's authority to Claudius was the rightful choice, that it was a moral duty to restore Claudius's position. And so, events unfolded one after another. First, Claudius was tricked into eating a devil fruit prepared as a mere fruit salad, no less becoming the laughingstock of the celestial dragons. This alone should have been enough, but Homing's stubbornness remained unmoved, even after Claudius became a joke among his peers. This only made things harder for those rational-minded celestial dragons who didn't want to see Claudius leading the family. Forced into a corner by Homing's stubbornness and Claudius's sheer ineptitude, they had no choice but to resort to drastic measures. Thus, the incident leading to Claudius's shipwreck occurred. After being poisoned with a devil fruit, he was cast out to sea. Given the way things played out, Claudius, a useless waste with no special abilities, should have died. In fact, he did die in that shipwreck. The original Claudius's soul perished, making way for the rebirth of a new one. Sitting on the rocky shore of this desolate island, Claudius felt exasperated as he recalled the absurd events that had transpired in his predecessor's life. If that fool had possessed just a bit of self-awareness and didn't arrogantly believe he deserved to be the head of the Don Quixote family, he wouldn't have ended up dead at sea. He wouldn't have eaten a devil fruit, let alone become a laughingstock. But what's done is done. There was no turning back now, and Claudius could only focus on the future. Currently, he was stranded on a deserted island. Building a ship by himself was not entirely impossible, but the problem was that he had no experience with sailing, let alone navigating through the dangerous new world. Attempting to go out to sea would only lead to a quicker death. Thus, from the very beginning, Claudius had no intention of building a ship to sail away. He was left with only two choices. The first option was to do nothing, accept this damn fate, and wait here until he really died. The previous owner of this body had already chosen this path, resulting in the current situation of having a new soul occupy his lifeless shell. The second option was to find a way to survive on this island and wait for rescue. Yes, even if this was a conspiracy, Claudius was still a celestial dragon. Even if it was for appearance's sake, the Don Quixote family would definitely send people to search for and rescue him. It's just that the process might be delayed. They would likely wait until everyone was certain Claudius was dead and lost forever before making a move. But that was enough for Claudius. He believed he could survive long enough for the rescue team to arrive and bring him back to Mary Ejo's. Damn it, when I get back to Mary Ejo's, the first thing I'm going to do is announce that I'm quitting this nonsense of being the Don Quixote family's patriarch. Whoever wants the position can take it. Claudius cursed angrily. With his current abilities, even if he now had a different soul, it was impossible for him to immediately gain support and become the head of the Don Quixote family. Rather than struggle for a position he wasn't suited for, it was better to just give it up, change his mindset, and alter his approach. As for whether he harbored any resentment towards those who orchestrated the downfall of his predecessor, well, not really. After all, he couldn't stand his predecessor's incompetence either. Claudius was a practical person. He wouldn't take on the burdens of his predecessor's debts just because he now inhabited his body. Swearing to avenge the former owner? That's simply not going to happen. Of course, if someone tried to kill him again in the future, well, Claudius wouldn't mind dealing with those who thought they could take him lightly. Well, it's useless to think about it too much now. Let's focus on how to survive until rescue comes. Damn it, a celestial dragon stranded on a deserted island? This is just ridiculous. Claudius laughed at himself bitterly. Chapter 3, King Engine? The deserted island Claudius found himself on was, in a way, rather pleasant. Despite being located in the dangerous waters of the New World, this particular island was a spring island. The climate was mild and temperate all year round, without the extreme shifts between hot and cold. Because of this, Claudius had an easier time surviving on the island compared to what he might have faced elsewhere in the New World. At this very moment, a massive wild boar was desperately fleeing through the dense forest. Its eyes, which held little intelligence, were now brimming with raw terror. Don't let the label of pig fool you. In reality, wild boars are formidable creatures of the wilderness. With their massive tusks, thick fur, powerful muscles, and enormous size, they often stand at the upper echelon of the food chain. Especially the wild boar currently fleeing in fear, it was no ordinary beast. This massive creature was comparable to an elephant from Claudius's previous life. Clearly, this was another mutated creature unique to the pirate world. This world was bizarre, filled with exaggerated and upgraded forms of both flora and fauna. Some animals remained similar to their counterparts from Claudius's past life, while others had evolved into something far more monstrous. For example, sea kings and Zunsha were so enormous that they defied common sense. Even humans here had their own distinct changes. Many of them were extraordinarily tall. Take Claudius's cousin, Don Quixote Doflamingo, as an example. If Doflamingo reached his full potential, he would be standing at a height of over 3 meters, a height suitable for a proper admiral, imposing and powerful. And Doflamingo's height was not even considered abnormal in this world. Many others were even taller than him. Claudius believed that if he trained well and developed properly, even though he was currently a fat, chubby kid, he wouldn't fall too far behind Doflamingo in the future. But those were all considerations for later. Right now, why was this massive wild boar running so frantically? That's because it had encountered the rampaging human brat who had been wreaking havoc on the island for the past 2 weeks, mercilessly hunting down all the top predators, like lions and tigers. Yes, Claudius was currently chasing after the wild boar, panting heavily as he ran. In just 2 weeks, his formerly rotund body had slimmed down considerably. While traces of his old greasy fat could still be seen, he now had a somewhat muscular build. The scene unfolding was indeed comical. A 10-year-old boy was relentlessly pursuing a massive wild boar that towered over him. The wild boar, instead of turning around to fight, was fleeing in terror, which was both amusing and absurd. "You stupid pig! Can't you just stop already?" Claudius gasped, cursing breathlessly as he glanced at the bloodied and battered wild boar ahead of him. After taking a few more steps and feeling himself reaching his physical limit, Claudius gradually came to a halt. He took a deep breath, and his eyes suddenly sharpened. In the next moment, his heartbeat began to accelerate, a deep and resonating sound spreading out from him, almost as if a drum was being pounded in the very core of his chest. Boom. 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 The intense rhythm felt as if it were echoing through the entire area around him, reverberating like the beating of war drums. Then, in the blink of an eye, Claudius moved again. But this time, his speed was several times faster than before. The tiny figure, leaving behind only a faint blur, sped through the forest, following the trail of blood on the ground. In mere moments, he caught up with the frantically running wild boar. Sensing the presence of the small human once more, the wild boar's terror only grew. It had already lost too much blood, and its strength was rapidly waning. Its pace, once full of vigor, began to slow as exhaustion set in. However, a cornered beast is always the most dangerous. Realizing that it could no longer escape, the wild boar suddenly skidded to a stop. With a surprising agility that seemed at odds with its immense size, it performed a flawless 360-degree turn, kicking up dirt and debris as it spun to face Claudius. What the hell? Since when did wild boars learn how to drift? Claudius thought, surprised by the sight. The wild boar, now using all the strength left in its body, charged at Claudius with deadly intent. Its four hooves thundered against the ground as it lowered its enormous, lethal tusks, aiming to skewer Claudius. A final struggle before death, huh? But it's useless. Claudius murmured, a faint smile appearing on his lips. Just as the wild boar came crashing toward him, Claudius moved again. His feet pushed off the ground as he leaped directly toward the wild boar's head. Death grip. Claudius muttered softly. In the next instant, it looked as if the massive wild boar had collided straight through Claudius's body, reducing him to nothing but mist. However, something strange happened next. The wild boar, after running a few more paces, began to stagger uncontrollably. It stumbled forward, its limbs twitching and thrashing about. It tossed its head violently, as if trying to rid itself of something. But no matter how much it struggled, it couldn't escape what was happening. Gradually, its frantic movements weakened until it finally collapsed to the ground, stirring up a massive cloud of dust. And right then, near the wild boar's nose, Claudius's figure slowly rematerialized. Yes, even though the original Claudius was a mentally retarded celestial dragon, completely incapable of even basic survival skills, his one redeeming trait was that, in his ignorance, he had eaten the devil fruit that was prepared for him in the form of a fruit salad. From that moment on, Claudius became a devil fruit user. Despite his predecessor's lack of education and inability to even comprehend the nature of his own powers, Claudius now had a remarkable ability at his disposal. This fruit was a Logia-type devil fruit, bestowing the powers of a rare gaseous element known as the nitrogen fruit. Claudius's predecessor, being an uneducated fool, didn't understand what kind of gas nitrogen was, nor did he realize the potential of his ability. As a result, he never developed it at all. Instead, he completely wasted it. But Claudius was different. Having received modern education and possessing a wealth of scientific knowledge, Claudius could grasp the potential of the nitrogen fruit immediately. Simply put, it was an ability that allowed him to manipulate nitrogen, a substance that made up a significant portion of the atmosphere, more than 78% to be exact. Being an inert gas, nitrogen had many unique properties. Of course, Claudius hadn't yet delved deeply into developing the fruit's full potential. For now, he was simply utilizing the basic effects of his Logia-type fruit, which was more than enough to dominate this small island. After all, none of the beasts here had the ability to use Haki, which meant Claudius didn't have to worry about whether he could be harmed or not. By turning into his elemental form, he could avoid all physical attacks. What's more, Claudius hadn't yet discovered any element that could restrain nitrogen. So, at least for now, he didn't have to worry about elemental weaknesses. Looking at it from one perspective, as long as no one used Haki or other special means, Claudius's current state seemed practically invincible. The way he killed the wild boar just now was a simple application of his Logia ability. There was no need for Claudius to develop complex techniques. All he had to do was grip the wild boar's nose and release his nitrogen, saturating the air around it and displacing all oxygen. Deprived of oxygen, the wild boar naturally suffocated and died. After ensuring the wild boar was truly dead, Claudius returned to his normal form. He touched his chin, glanced at the massive carcass, and smiled faintly. All things considered, my new journey hasn't started off too badly. Although the circumstances were a bit messy, I have a genuine celestial dragon identity and the abilities of a Logia-type devil fruit. Now, as long as I lay a solid foundation, I should be able to make some waves in this world. And reshape my fate, Claudius muttered softly. As he spoke, Claudius drew a short sword that hung from his waist. This short sword looked somewhat like a katana from Wano, though it was much shorter, about 2/3 the length of a regular sword. Despite its simplicity, the sword's craftsmanship was excellent, exuding the aura of a master's work. The white hilt was wrapped with delicate silk threads, and the scabbard, while unassuming, was adorned with subtle patterns. This wasn't a decoration Claudius had scavenged from the celestial dragon's collections, rather, it was one of the 3 gift packs he had received when he first arrived in this world. That's right, as a transmigrator, how could Claudius not have a beginner's benefit? By some divine or otherworldly blessing, he had received some rewards after arriving in this world. This short sword was named Shinso, the legendary Zanpakuto wielded by Akamaru Jin, the captain of the 3rd division in the world of Shinigami. Now, it was in Claudius's hands. However, it seemed that during the transition between worlds, Shinso had been altered by the forces of this world's power, making it far less potent than it had been in the Shinigami world. Even so, it was still a rare and remarkable weapon. It retained its ability to extend and retract, but its speed was no longer the absurd 500 times the speed of sound. Through continuous testing, Claudius determined that Shinso's current maximum speed was around 3 times the speed of sound. While this was certainly impressive, it wasn't overwhelmingly fast compared to some of the terrifying abilities in this world. The speed of sound is roughly the same as that of a bullet from a musket. So Shinso's speed was only 2 to 3 times faster than a standard bullet. This meant that, while Shinso was a formidable weapon against ordinary opponents, it wouldn't have the same devastating effect on true masters. Although its power had been greatly diminished due to the world's corrections, Claudius didn't mind. An indestructible sword that could extend and retract at will was still a valuable asset. He had no intention of relying solely on the sword for combat, so he accepted its current state without complaint. After drawing Shinso from its scabbard, Claudius made a few clean, precise cuts across the enormous wild boar's hide, creating deep incisions that allowed blood to flow freely from the carcass. Bleeding the meat was essential. If the blood wasn't drained properly, the resulting stench and flavor would be absolutely revolting. Claudius had learned this lesson the hard way during his early days on the island, so now he took care to bleed the meat thoroughly, even if it meant a bit of extra effort. Shinso was the first of his 3 gifts, and the second gift Claudius found highly intriguing. It was an ability that allowed him to freely accelerate his heartbeat at will, a phenomenon he had come to know as the King Engine. Chapter 4, Looking for Claudius? The so-called King Engine. The name of this special ability originates from the world of One Punch Man. It was the signature technique of King, the so-called strongest man on Earth. Supposedly, once King activated this ability, it was as if he entered a berserk state, capable of smashing enemies to pulp with ease. In reality, the King Engine was nothing more than a gimmick. The strongest man on Earth was simply a bluffing master, someone who survived on sheer luck, no different from the likes of God Buggy in this world. The King Engine's only real effect was its constant acceleration of the heartbeat. Yet, it was due to this ability that King was mythologized as the strongest on Earth. When Claudius first acquired this ability, he felt rather helpless. As a pragmatic individual, he couldn't help but think, isn't this just a load of crap? Couldn't he have been granted a more practical power? If push came to shove, Claudius would have been willing to give up his beautiful blonde hair and go bald if it meant getting something more useful. In the beginning, Claudius viewed the accelerated heartbeat ability as nothing more than a means of showing off. He didn't believe he could become the strongest on Earth in the pirate world through such a ridiculous technique. However, after several rounds of experimentation, Claudius discovered that this ability held more potential than he had initially thought. The constant acceleration of his heartbeat inevitably increased blood circulation throughout his body, which in turn could enhance his overall physical functions, including his hematopoietic ability. Through multiple trials, Claudius confirmed at least one thing: once he activated the King Engine and his heartbeat accelerated, he could indeed enter a sort of rampage state. It was fair to call it a berserk mode. The King Engine allowed him to temporarily boost his physical capabilities, improving strength, speed, and stamina. The burst of speed he had demonstrated while chasing the wild boar earlier was a prime example of what this ability could achieve. Of course, given his current physical limitations, this was the extent of what Claudius could do. But the potential for further development and exploration of this ability was enormous. If Claudius's body could withstand the strain, he could use the King Engine as a trump card, a sudden power surge to overwhelm enemies who were otherwise on par with him. And, if he were to add a few flashy catchphrases, like "I'm getting serious now," or "I didn't think you'd push me this far," the whole dramatic effect would be taken to another level, wouldn't it? Thus, Claudius was actually quite satisfied with the potential of the King Engine. Whether for practical combat or pure bravado, the development possibilities were endless, making it well worth further study. As for the last of his transmigrator gifts, it was an ability called Zero-Hour Mizu, seemingly originating from the world of Shakugan no Shana. Claudius didn't know much about its original context. Fortunately, there was a manual of sorts in his mind, so he was able to grasp the basics. Zero-Hour Mizu was the ability to reset time to zero. In essence, it allowed the user to restore all their energy and vitality to a reset point at 0 hour. While the concept of existence power didn't apply to this world, Claudius experimented with the ability and eventually figured out its utility. Simply put, it functions somewhat like the creation rebirth ability from Naruto. Although it didn't rely on any special energy, it could store the user's surplus energy and physical strength within 0 hour Mizu throughout the day. When needed, the stored reserves could be released, restoring Claudius's stamina and strength to their peak levels. While it wasn't an overwhelmingly powerful skill at the moment, Claudius saw its potential for the future. It could be invaluable in prolonged battles, or for engaging in more vigorous activities. Yeah, that's right. After all, I'm still a celestial dragon, a world noble. There's no problem with marrying 10 or even 8 wives, is there? It's completely legitimate and legal. If the body can't handle it and I overtax myself, I could always open up 0-hour Mizo and... He shook his head to dispel the distracting thoughts, focusing back on the wild boar. After ensuring that the blood had drained into a small pool nearby, Claudius shifted his attention away from his fantasies. Using Shinso, he sliced off a few choice cuts of meat from the wild boar, ensuring to pick the most tender and flavorful sections. Speaking of which, it's been 2 weeks since I was killed, right? By now, those guys should be sending a rescue team to wrap things up. After all, if I were in their shoes, I wouldn't think my previous self could survive a shipwreck alone for a full 2 weeks. As Claudius mused over these thoughts, 5 massive warships were steadily approaching the island from not too far away. On the deck of one of the enormous warships stood a middle-aged man clad in a marine coat of justice, a cigar clamped between his teeth. He wore sunglasses and kept his arms crossed, staring silently out at the vast sea. The man's short lavender hair was slightly disheveled, and his muscular frame exuded a restrained yet formidable aura. This man was none other than the current Marine Headquarters Admiral, Zephyr the Black Arm. Zephyr's life was a tragic yet tenacious one. As an admiral, he held a compassionate heart and refrained from killing pirates, earning him the nickname the Admiral Who Doesn't Kill. But it was this very mercy that allowed seeds of evil to remain. Eventually, vengeful pirates took the lives of his beloved wife and child. Devastated, Zephyr resigned as admiral and redirected his focus to training the next generation of Marines. He became an instructor at the Marine Headquarters training camp, raising many exceptional students. It could be said that most of the Marines' high-ranking officers in the later years were personally taught by him. Eventually, a series of further tragedies led Zephyr to become disillusioned with the world government and the Marines. He left to found Neo-Marines, attempting to destroy the New World. His tragic yet heroic life ultimately ended at the hands of then Admiral Kizaru Borsellino. But those were stories for the future. At this point, Zephyr had yet to experience such heartbreak. He was still brimming with vigor and confidence. The task of the fleet under his command at this moment was simple yet complex: to locate the celestial dragon, Don Quixote Claudius, who had been shipwrecked in this sea more than 2 weeks ago. In truth, Zephyr had no desire to get involved in such affairs. It was clear that Claudius's delayed rescue was due to the scheming and power plays of those in Mage. As a Marine Admiral, while his status might seem prestigious in the eyes of the common folk, to the elites in Mage, he was just a useful pawn, a mere errand boy. Involvement in such matters was fraught with risk. But the problem was that the Marine Headquarters only had 2 admirals at the moment. Garp adamantly refused promotion to admiral, while Sengoku had other crucial matters to attend to. However, when something happened to a celestial dragon, the highest level of authority must be mobilized to address it. So, in the end, an admiral had to be dispatched to oversee the situation. Thus, the burden of this mess fell onto Zephyr's shoulders. Just as Zephyr was lost in thought, a lazy yet youthful voice called out from behind him. "Teacher Zephyr, are you still worried about the celestial dragon?" "Honestly, I don't think there's any point. It's been 2 weeks since the shipwreck. Even if it were a powerful person, they'd have been devoured by sharks by now. And that's not to mention. We're talking about a celestial dragon. So I think this so-called rescue mission is nothing more than a political exercise, isn't it?" Hearing the voice, Zephyr turned around, glancing at the young man behind him. A faint smile tugged at the corners of his lips. This young man had joined the newly established Marine Officer Training Camp 2 years ago. During his time as an instructor, Zephyr had discovered several promising talents, and one of them was the young man who now bore the rank of Rear Admiral on his shoulders. Kusn. "You're right, Kusn. This mission will most likely end in failure. It may be labeled a rescue mission, but it's more of a formality, a political obligation." However, Zephyr sighed and shook his head. "I'm afraid that once we return, those celestial dragon lords will shift the blame for St. Claudius's death onto us, claiming it was due to the Marine Headquarters' incompetence. At that point, we'll have no recourse." Kusn, still inexperienced, looked at Zephyr with some surprise and asked, "What should we do then? They wouldn't really be that unreasonable, would they?" Zephyr chuckled softly, then said, "Hey, when you become an admiral someday and interact more with those people, you'll come to understand. Their celestial dragon masters are indeed that unreasonable." Zephyr replied, his smile fading slightly. After a brief pause, Zephyr rotated his shoulders, turning his gaze back to the horizon. "So, even if this mission is just a formality, we must do it perfectly. We can't leave any room for those lords to nitpick and blame us later. Although it's highly likely that Claudius has already perished at sea, we must proceed as if he's still alive and in need of rescue." That's the only way we can minimize any problems that may arise in the future. Kuzen ran a hand through his shaggy hair, considering Zephyr's words before nodding thoughtfully. You're right, teacher. I'm still too young to see the bigger picture. So, what's our next course of action? Zephyr's eyes narrowed as he glanced at the vast expanse of ocean surrounding them. There's only one deserted island in this sea area. If, and I mean if, by some miraculous 1 in 10,000 chance, Claudius is still alive, he can only be on that island. So, our priority now is to search the surface waters while heading straight to that island. Once there, we'll search thoroughly for any sign of Claudius. Kuzen nodded, understanding the plan. After a moment of contemplation, he looked up at Zephyr and softly asked, but teacher, what if that 1 in 10,000 chance actually happens? I mean, it seems like some people higher up might not want St. Claudius to return alive. Stop right there, Kuzen, Zephyr interrupted sternly, his expression turning serious as he fixed his gaze on his disciple. After a tense pause, Zephyr's expression softened slightly. He placed a firm hand on Kuzen's shoulder and spoke in a low but earnest tone. Kuzen, you're still young, and there's much you don't yet understand. But there's one thing I want you to remember, never get too involved with those celestial dragons. Maybe some people above us don't want Claudius to survive, but we only need to do our duty. He looked deeply into Kuzen's eyes, as if trying to imprint the gravity of his words into his disciple's mind. All we need to do is what's expected of us. Even if the chances are slim, if Claudius is still alive, then we must bring him back to Mage safely. Understand? Kuzen had immense respect for his teacher, and after hearing Zephyr's heartfelt admonishment, he nodded earnestly. I understand, teacher. I'll remember your words. Good, Zephyr said, giving Kuzen a reassuring pat on the shoulder. The veteran admiral turned back to face the sea, his gaze distant and contemplative as the fleet continued its steady approach toward the lone island. Chapter 5, The End of the Sea Circle. Calendar 1490. When the silhouette of the desert island appeared on the horizon, Zephyr and Kuzen's expressions both froze. They spotted black smoke rising from the island, a telltale sign that someone was lighting a fire. No way. Did we just stumble upon that 1 in 10,000 chance? Kuzen muttered incredulously. Zephyr's eyes narrowed thoughtfully before he gave a decisive order. It might just be what we're thinking. Quickly, tell the warship to increase speed. Couldn't it just be a lightning strike or something? I mean, the chances of lightning starting a fire are probably higher than St. Claudius being alive. Kuzen said, smacking his lips in disbelief. Whatever it is, we need to check it out, Zephyr responded, quickening his pace as he prepared to land. The warship surged ahead, closing the distance to the desert island. Meanwhile, atop the mountain on the island, Claudius sat, grilling the wild boar he had hunted. He gazed out at the ocean, scanning the horizon from his high vantage point. His eyes caught sight of several warships swiftly approaching the island. Taking a bite of the poorly cooked boar meat, Claudius let out a deep sigh and muttered to himself, finally. After all this waiting, they're coming. Have they sent someone to rescue me? Or is this just to confirm my death? But Claudius made no move to meet the ships. After all, he was a celestial dragon. There was no need for him to rush. It was their job to come to him. While it might seem arrogant, it was perfectly in line with the lofty status of a celestial dragon. So, Claudius remained where he was, calmly waiting, no longer forcing himself to eat the unappetizing boar. After all, as soon as he boarded a warship, he could expect food far better than this. The Marines' warship reached the shore, and Zephyr, along with Kuzen and a contingent of Marines, quickly disembarked. They raced up the mountain, heading toward the plume of smoke. Upon reaching the summit, Zephyr finally laid eyes on the mission's objective, an unkempt and disheveled figure sitting near the fire. But there was no mistaking it, this was indeed St. Claudius, who had been stranded after a shipwreck for the past 2 weeks. As they neared him, Zephyr slowed his pace. Though he had never met Claudius before, he had heard stories. After all, a celestial dragon who had consumed a devil fruit was bound to be well known. The rumors painted Claudius as a spoiled young man, temperamental, lacking any real ability, and incredibly difficult to deal with. Zephyr couldn't help but wonder how much anger had built up in Claudius' heart after being stranded for so long. He steeled himself, fully expecting to deal with an outburst of some sort. Approaching Claudius cautiously, Zephyr swallowed and said softly, St. Claudius, I deeply regret the hardships you've faced. I'm Zephyr, an admiral of the Navy headquarters, and I personally led the fleet to rescue you. I'm relieved to see you in good health. Claudius, for his part, recognized Zephyr immediately. This was a famous figure, after all, a Marine admiral with a distinguished reputation. Seeing him in person confirmed Claudius' suspicions. When Zephyr spoke, he bowed slightly in respect. Though Marine admirals generally received some level of respect from the world government, they still couldn't avoid showing deference to the celestial dragons. However, Zephyr was not required to kneel. Rear Admiral Kusn and the other Marines accompanying Zephyr, on the other hand, did not enjoy such privileges. Despite feeling somewhat disgruntled, Kusn lowered his head, preparing to give a formal bow. But before they could complete the motion, Claudius spoke up. "It's fine. There's no need for such formality." Zephyr and Kusn blinked in surprise, momentarily taken aback. The Marine officers froze as well. However, the soldiers had already fallen to their knees, bowing in submission before the celestial dragon. Watching this scene, Claudius couldn't help but feel conflicted. While his memories told him that people often bowed and scraped before him, seeing it in reality for the first time left a different impression. These Marines, symbols of justice and strength at sea, were now groveling in front of him. It was a stark reminder of how much power the celestial dragons wielded. Claudius had no desire to indulge in such theatrics. Forcing these men, especially potential rising stars like Kusn, to debase themselves would bring him no real benefit. He might derive some fleeting satisfaction, but it would come at the cost of resentment. A man like Kusn was destined for greatness, likely to become a Marine admiral in the future. It was far better to show a little leniency and avoid fostering bad blood between them. Seeing the stunned expressions on Zephyr and Kusn's faces, Claudius waved his hand dismissively. "Let's not waste time. I appreciate you finding this island and rescuing me. But I've had enough of this place. I want to return to Mage immediately." Claudius' unexpected display of good temper threw Zephyr for a loop. He had braced himself for insults or worse but was met with unexpected civility instead. Still, Zephyr didn't dare question it. Nodding quickly, he replied, "Of course, Saint Claudius. We'll see to it that you're safely escorted back to Mage without delay." As Zephyr gave the command, the Marines swiftly prepared to set sail. Glancing around the island, Zephyr noticed the remnants of a fire, some half-cooked wild boar, and bones scattered about. It seemed the celestial dragon had truly been surviving on his own these past weeks. "I get the feeling Claudius isn't like the other celestial dragons," Kusn mused quietly. Zephyr nodded in agreement. "Indeed. He's not quite what I expected. But maybe this experience humbled him. Who knows?" They both shared a chuckle, Kusn adding, "Yeah, maybe. Still, it's rare to meet a celestial dragon like him. I guess I was just curious." "Well, enjoy it while it lasts. You'll probably never want to see a celestial dragon again after this," Zephyr said with a smile. Meanwhile, aboard the warship, Claudius was soaking in a bath, finally able to relax after weeks of hardship. While he had been able to find water on the island, proper toiletries had been out of the question. Now, he was relishing the chance to finally rid himself of the grime and exhaustion. Zephyr and Kusn. "With the two of them here, I can rest easy. They'll get me back to Mage without any issues," Claudius murmured, sinking deeper into the warm water. After a long, satisfying soak, Claudius stood up and examined himself in the mirror. "I've changed a bit these past 2 weeks," he noted, poking at the fat around his stomach. Though he still carried a bit of extra weight, the time spent roughing it on the island had clearly toughened him up. He'd shed some fat, and his arms and legs now had a bit of muscle tone. "Maybe with some proper training, I can finally shake off the greasy label," Claudius said to himself with a small grin. He dressed in the luxurious clothes the Marines had provided, finding them a bit loose after his weight loss. Nevertheless, they were still far more comfortable than anything he had worn on the island. Stepping out of the bathroom, Claudius noticed that every Marine he passed immediately bowed their heads in respect. He acknowledged them casually, more to prevent them from dropping to their knees than out of any real courtesy. Eventually, he arrived at his room on the ship. Despite being aboard a warship, the accommodations were surprisingly spacious and comfortable. "This room's probably the result of the 2 weeks they spent preparing to rescue me," Claudius thought with a smirk. Without looking back, he called out to the Marine standing outside his door, "Go prepare a proper lunch for me. And invite Admiral Zephyr to join me for the meal." The Marine saluted and quickly replied, "Yes, Saint Claudius. I'll convey your orders immediately." Once alone, Claudius sat down and took a sip of the tea that had been prepared for him. He murmured to himself, "See Circle Calendar 1490. I know a few things about what's to come, but it's best to confirm them with Zephyr." Chapter 1, Yatsuya Maiko? A young figure slowly climbed up from the riverbank, glancing around in confusion. Ryuji Hoshino wasn't sure if it was because this place was too remote or because it was already near dusk, but the area was completely deserted, and an air of loneliness pervaded the atmosphere. Still feeling a bit dazed, Ryuji tried to make sense of his situation. Just a moment ago, he had been sitting comfortably in his dorm, watching anime, and now, in the blink of an eye, he found himself in this unfamiliar place. Did I seriously got reincarnated? That's ridiculous. Most people get reincarnated after getting hit by a truck or touching a live electric switch, but he somehow managed it just by watching a show. What kind of absurdity was this? Now, with his whole body soaking wet, his clothes clung uncomfortably to his skin, making him feel even more uneasy. Did I jump into the river? Ryuji glanced at the flowing water behind him before looking down at his soaked appearance, his eyelid twitching in irritation. His school uniform was now drenched and clinging to his body, making him feel even more weighed down. Kneeling by the riverbank, he gazed at his distorted reflection in the ripples. His normally neat dark hair was now in disarray, and the sharpness in his red eyes had faded, replaced by a weary dullness. Pick and comment, no matter how weird this situation was, he figured the first step should be to figure out where he was. He scanned his surroundings again but found nothing that seemed remotely familiar. Thankfully, the next moment, his head throbbed, and suddenly, a flood of memories surged into his mind. Hiss. It took a while before Ryuji fully regained his composure and began to digest the new memories. So, he really did jump into the river. From the memories now embedded in his mind, Ryuji could piece together the past of this body's previous owner. The previous owner's name was also Ryuji Hoshino. He had grown up on the Kyushu mainland but moved to Tokyo during high school for his studies. From the beginning, life here in Tokyo had always been full of cliques, and bullying was rampant. The previous Ryuji, being introverted and reserved, naturally became a prime target for such harassment. The bullying eventually reached a breaking point, and unable to cope any longer, the original Ryuji had jumped into the river. That was when the current Ryuji Hoshino took over. After organizing these memories, Ryuji couldn't help but feel a little disdainful toward the original owner. You had the guts to face death, but not to stand up for yourself? It didn't make sense to him. If the previous Ryuji had the courage to die, why couldn't he muster the courage to fight back? After all, wasn't the worst consequence of resistance death as well? At the very least, he could have taken one or two of his tormentors down with him. That would have been a small victory in itself. TSK, forget it. In any case, the original Ryuji Hoshino was dead, and the new one him was here now. With the memories sorted out, Ryuji at least knew where he was. It was quite far from where he lived, and he usually took a bus to get back. With that thought, Ryuji got his bearings and began walking in the direction of the nearest bus stop. Wait. Is this an anime world? As Ryuji walked, he continued processing the influx of memories from the original body. It seemed like a normal, parallel world at first glance, but soon enough, he realized there was more to it than that. In the neighboring class, there was a well-known high-class girl named Yukino Shita Yukino, while the art club's ace was none other than Sawamura Ariri. There was also a top student in the senior year named Kasumijoka Utaha, often referred to as Sleeping Beauty, and the current rising star among female high schoolers was Sakura Jimimai. Not only that, but the largest conglomerate in Tokyo was called the Shinomiya Consortium. All these familiar names told Ryuji that this was no ordinary parallel world. It was an anime world, a world made up of various anime characters and settings. I wonder, is this just an everyday, slice-of-life anime world, or is there something more supernatural going on? If it was just a regular slice-of-life setting, then there wasn't much to worry about. At most, he'd be dealing with high school drama and youthful mischief. But if there were extraordinary or supernatural elements at play, then things would be a lot more complicated. Damn, and I don't even have any special abilities. Ryuji tried calling out mentally, hoping for a cheat system or some kind of special ability, but there was no response. What happened to the classic trope where all time travelers get some kind of cheat or overpowered skill? Wasn't that supposed to be guaranteed? Even though he had read plenty of web novels, it seemed like he wasn't going to be one of those lucky ones. Still, even without cheats, with the knowledge he had from all the anime and novels, he figured he could at least scrape by as a plagiarist. Well, let's get back home first. No matter how many plans he might have, they'd have to wait until he fully understood the world he was in. With that, Ryuji glanced up and saw the bus stop in the distance. He quickened his pace. When Ryuji arrived at the bus stop, he noticed it was relatively empty, likely because it was already getting dark. Besides himself, there was only one other person waiting, a girl wearing a school uniform. She was looking down at her phone, so he could only see her profile. She looked familiar. For some reason, Ryuji felt like he had seen this JK girl somewhere before. However, she didn't seem to notice him, her attention completely absorbed by her phone. It would be awkward to just walk up and greet her, especially if he ended up being wrong. In Tokyo, approaching a stranger without reason could easily get you labeled as a weirdo or worse, a pervert. Having just crossed over into this world, Ryuji wasn't keen on causing unnecessary trouble. He decided to wait quietly for the bus to arrive. At the same time, the girl Yatsuya Maiko wasn't as focused on her phone as she appeared to be. Her fingers tapped on the screen, but her thoughts were elsewhere. What's happening? Since earlier today, I've been seeing these terrifying things. Are they illusions? But no, the horrifying figures were still lingering around Maiko, giving her chills. Can you see it? Can you see it? A grating, hoarse voice echoed in her ears, sending a shiver down her spine. Maiko had a terrible feeling that if these monstrous beings realized she could see them, things would go very, very wrong. To avoid detection, she had no choice but to pretend to be engrossed in her phone, even though her heart was pounding in fear. What's that? Out of the corner of her eye, Maiko noticed someone approaching. For a moment, she worried it might be another monster, so she sneaked a glance. Though she didn't recognize him, she did recognize the uniform he was wearing. It was from Sobu High School, the same school she attended. But she had no idea which class he was in. Still, why was he completely soaked? Could he be a water ghost? Recalling some of the creepy stories she'd read online, Maiko couldn't help but tremble slightly. Thankfully, she soon noticed the shadow beneath Ryuji's feet. If there was a shadow, then he had to be human. As long as he wasn't some kind of monster, she could relax at least a little. Ryuji also noticed that the girl had glanced at him, though it seemed more like a quick, cautious peek. For some reason, her face looked even more familiar now, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't quite remember who she was. Just then, the distant sound of a bus approaching drew his attention. He looked up and saw the bus slowly approaching. Chapter 2, Golden Entry, Yin Yang Eyes Ha. Seeing the bus approaching, Maiko's face lit up with pure relief, as though she had just spotted her savior. Without hesitation, she quickly walked to the bus stop. Following closely behind her, Ryuji also noticed the girl's audible sigh of relief. Was it really that big of a deal? So happy just to see the bus coming? Ryuji found himself a bit surprised at her reaction. As the bus came to a stop, Maiko hurriedly prepared to board, clearly eager to get away from something. She had thought that once she got on the bus, she wouldn't have to deal with those terrifying things anymore. But as soon as the door opened, her eyes widened in horror. There, inside the bus, stood a grotesque monster. Ah! Maiko stumbled back in terror, almost crying out loud. What in the world was this? How could there be a monster on the bus? Her entire body trembled with fear. Ryuji, standing just behind her, hadn't noticed anything at first. But then, suddenly, the girl backed upright into his arms, completely unaware of what had just happened. Are you okay? Ryuji asked, his hands lightly touching her shoulders, trying to steady her. Before he could make sense of the situation, a mechanical voice suddenly rang out in his mind. Successfully contacted a target, Yotsuya Maiko. The golden entry has been triggered. Do you want to load it? A system. I have a system. I thought I was just some unlucky reincarnator without any cheats. Turns out I just hadn't met the trigger conditions yet. Ryuji felt a flicker of joy. But a second later, something hit him. Wait. Did the voice just say Yotsuya Maiko? Ryuji froze for a moment, then looked down at the girl in his arms. Her distinct golden eyes were filled with tears, and her face had the expression of someone utterly terrified, like a cornered animal. It tugged at his heartstrings. So, it really was Yotsuya Maiko. No wonder she had looked so familiar. No, I'm fine. Maiko finally responded, stepping back as she regained her balance. Can you see me? Can you see me? The monster on the bus had noticed Maiko's earlier reaction. It immediately floated toward her, its eyes glinting with malice. Maiko knew she had to say something to defuse the situation, otherwise things could go very, very wrong. She hurriedly forced a nervous laugh and said, I just stood still for too long, and my legs went a bit numb. I'm really sorry about what happened just now. Though she was terrified, a part of her was also incredibly embarrassed. After all, she had just leaned into a boy's arms. Except for her father, who had passed away, she'd never been this close to another guy. Ryuji, on the other hand, shook his head. It's okay. If it had been anyone else, Ryuji probably wouldn't have thought much of it. But knowing that this was Yotsuya Maiko, and given what he remembered from the anime she came from, there had to be something more to this. In that anime, Maiko possessed the ability to see horrifying creatures, beings invisible to normal people. These monsters wouldn't harm you unless they realized that you could actually see them. As long as you pretended not to notice, you were safe. But judging by her reaction just now, there must be something on the bus that was terrifying her. Weirdly enough, Ryuji couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. Let's get on the bus first, he said calmly, his mind racing with thoughts. If this had been earlier, before he realized what kind of world he was in and before the system appeared, he might have been more worried. But now that he had a cheat system on his side, what was there to be afraid of? Maiko replied in a barely audible voice. Can you see me? Can you see me? The grotesque entity hovering nearby seemed disappointed by Maiko's casual response. Its previously menacing expression became dull and aimless as it floated back, seemingly convinced that it hadn't been noticed. Phew. Maiko felt a wave of relief wash over her as she followed Ryuji onto the bus. There were only a few people inside. Apart from the driver, just a handful of office workers were seated, either playing on their phones or resting with their eyes closed. Ryuji found a seat by the window and sat down, while Maiko quickly chose a seat a bit further ahead. She immediately pulled out her phone again, pretending to be engrossed in it, but in reality, she was trying to avoid looking at the still lurking monster. Her posture grew even more hunched over, trying to make herself as inconspicuous as possible. System. Leaning against the window, Ryuji called out in his mind, hoping to hear from his newly discovered plug-in. What had just happened definitely wasn't his imagination. Thankfully, a voice responded in his head, bringing a sense of relief. Detected. The host has successfully triggered a gold entry, Yin-Yang Eyes. Loading. Yin-Yang Eyes? That actually sounded like a good thing, but it was probably triggered because of Yotsuya Maiko. So, if I come into contact with anime protagonists in this world, I can trigger abilities like this? Not bad. Without hesitating, Ryuji quickly chose to load the new ability. It seemed useful, so why not activate it right away? Wait. What the hell? Yin-Yang Eyes? Ryuji suddenly realized what was happening, and panic surged through him. Why the hell did I choose that? Yin-Yang Eyes means I'll be able to see all those creepy monsters. I don't want that. But it was too late. Gold entry loaded successfully. In the next instant, Ryuji felt a strange sensation in his eyes, followed by a slight sting. He blinked, and a few tears rolled down his cheeks. When he opened his eyes again, the entire world had changed. The grotesque monster that Maiko had been reacting to was now clearly visible to him too. Can you see me? Can you see me? The creature's body was grotesquely distorted, with writhing tentacles emerging from its form, its movements unsettling and unnatural. It floated from one passenger to another, hovering close to their faces and asking the same question over and over again. No wonder Maiko had looked so terrified. If I had suddenly seen this thing without warning, I'd probably have freaked out too. Deciding not to react, Ryuji quickly closed his eyes and leaned back, feigning sleep. He might have gained the ability to see these creatures, but that didn't mean he had to engage with them. Can you see me? Can you see me? The monster's voice sounded uncomfortably close, but Ryuji kept his eyes shut, staying completely still. System, you've really screwed me over this time. If you don't give me a way out of this, we're both done for. He cursed internally. Thankfully, the system responded right away. Detected, host has an unused novice gift pack. Would you like to claim it? A novice gift pack? At a time like this? Perfect? Ryuji instantly felt a surge of hope. Use it. He commanded without hesitation. Chapter 3, Congratulations to the host for obtaining one chance to extract a red entry. Do you want to use it? A red entry? So, in addition to gold entries, there are other types. I wonder what kind of result this red entry will yield. Without much hesitation, Ryuji Hoshino immediately chose to use it. Extraction successful, you have obtained the red entry, Soul Devourer. Do you want to load it? Soul Devourer? What kind of ability is that? After his recent experience with Yin-Yang Eyes, Ryuji wasn't about to blindly load a new ability without first understanding what it did. At the very least, he needed to know the specifics before diving headfirst into something potentially dangerous. Soul Devouring. By devouring spirits, you can increase your strength without limit. Devouring spirits? How exactly do I devour them? Do I eat them with my mouth? Images of the grotesque creature he'd just seen flashed through Ryuji's mind, and he couldn't help but feel disgusted. There was no way he could stomach eating something like that, even if it did grant him power. Unfortunately, the system didn't elaborate any further. Well, it was a power that promised limitless strength, so he figured he might as well load it first and see how it worked. Loading. This time, Ryuji didn't feel any discomfort, just the subtle sensation of a strange, latent energy circulating within his body. As for how to actually use this new ability, that was still unclear. I wonder if the system can give me a more detailed introduction? He mused aloud, hoping for a response. Silence. System. Again, no answer. Ryuji's face darkened as he realized something troubling. Could this system be one of those basic, no-frills types that doesn't have any form of intelligence? Fortunately, though the system was rather unresponsive, it still fed essential information directly into Ryuji's mind. Little by little, he began to understand how it worked. In short, the system operated by loading talents, or entries, onto him. These talents could be triggered under certain conditions, like how his yin-yang eyes had been triggered by his encounter with Yotsuya Maiko. It seemed that making contact with anime protagonists in this world was one way to activate talents. As for the various types of entries, they were color-coded by rarity and power. The lowest rank was white, followed by green, blue, purple, gold, and finally red, the highest rank. In addition to passively triggering talents, Ryuji could also use points to extract them. 10 points would get him a white entry, 100 points for green, and 1000 points for blue. Each tier required exponentially more points than the last. However, one key thing still eluded him: how to actually earn points. That part remained unclear for now. Open my character template. Ryuji commanded mentally, knowing the system had to have something that tracked his progress. In the next second, a transparent data screen appeared in front of him, visible only to his eyes. Talent entry system host, Ryuji Hoshino bloodline, human loaded entries, soul devouring, red, yin-yang eyes, gold, points, 0. It's a bit thin for now, but it's a start. Ryuji couldn't help but wonder about the potential of his new ability, soul devouring. It sounded incredibly powerful, limitless strength from devouring spirits. If that were true, the possibilities were endless. But how exactly does it work? Just then, would you like a bottle of water? The question, spoken in a hoarse, slightly aged voice, startled him out of his thoughts. Out of reflex, Ryuji shook his head, assuming it was an elderly person offering a bit of kindness. No, thank you, he replied absent-mindedly. But when he turned around, what he saw sent a chill down his spine. The one asking was not a person. It was the monstrous creature he had seen earlier, its twisted, hideous form looming right beside him. Shit. Ryuji cursed aloud. In his lapse of judgment, he had forgotten that this world was filled with bizarre and dangerous things. Yotsuya Maiko had been tricked by something similar in the anime. You can see me. As expected, the monster's expression twisted into a gruesome grin, and its once vacant eyes now gleamed with sadistic delight. It lunged toward Ryuji, its intent clear: it was going to devour him. That guy? Maiko, though pretending to look at her phone, had been keeping a watchful eye on the strange events around her. She hadn't expected to see someone else who could perceive these monsters just like her. But now, it looked like the boy was in serious trouble. She was about to scream for help when, suddenly, the scene in front of her unfolded in a way that left her completely stunned. You bastard. Ryuji never imagined that he would actually fall for a monster's trick. The fact that it had even managed to bait him into responding made his blood boil with frustration. As the creature lunged at him, Ryuji remembered the crucial detail: the moment they realize you can see them, they'll attack without hesitation. In that instant, his face hardened with determination. Soul devouring. If you want to eat me, I'll devour you first. Initially, Ryuji thought he'd have to literally bite into the creature, something he dreaded. But just as he activated the soul devouring ability, the space behind him began to warp and twist, and soon, a dark crack formed in the air. Swish. Swish. From that crack, several dark chains shot out and wrapped around the monster, binding it tightly. What is this? Wait. Let me go. Let me go. The monster struggled desperately, but the chains held it fast. Without any chance of escape, it was dragged toward the crack. Its voice, once full of menace, now screamed in terror. In just a few seconds, the creature vanished into the void, and the crack in space closed up, leaving no trace behind. Silence fell. Burp. Ryuji blinked in surprise, a soft burp escaping him. Did I just get full from that? He glanced around, confused. Except for Maiko, who was staring at him wide-eyed in disbelief, the other passengers, the office workers and the bus driver, remained completely oblivious. They hadn't seen the monster, the chains, or the crack in space. To them, everything appeared normal. So, this is soul devouring, huh? Ryuji had initially imagined he'd have to physically consume the ghosts, bite by bite. But as it turned out, it wasn't that at all. And as the monster's energy was absorbed into him, Ryuji could feel an immediate change, a surge of power coursing through his body. It was as if something inside him had awakened. Just moments ago, he had been a scrawny high school student with nothing to show for himself. But now, Ryuji felt like he could punch through solid concrete if he wanted to. Holy shit. He clenched his fists, feeling the raw strength swelling within him. A giddy, exhilarated grin spread across his face. Chapter 4, It's Fine, I'm Invincible. Although Ryuji felt it might be a little too early to declare that, but he couldn't shake off the inexplicable feeling. The monster. It was eaten? Maiko, who had no time to scream, could only stare at where Ryuji had been standing, clearly stunned by what she had just witnessed. After seeing such a terrifying monster, Maiko was already in disbelief, but what happened next shocked her even more. It looked like he was just a student from the same school as her. When Maiko finally gathered her thoughts, She realized that the bus had stopped, and Riji had already disappeared from sight. Realizing this was also her stop, and that the bus door was about to close, she hurriedly called out, "Wait, please." She quickly pocketed her phone and rushed off the bus, spotting Riji walking a short distance ahead of her. Maiko hesitated. She wanted to go up to him, say hello, and ask about the monster, but the scene from earlier left her scared. After all, this was someone who had devoured such a terrifying creature without breaking a sweat. "What if he eats me too?" she whispered nervously. But in the next moment, "No, you smell too bad." Maiko, still lost in thought with her head lowered, instinctively retorted without thinking. "Who said that? I shower every day." For any girl, an insult about her hygiene was not something to be taken lightly. But then she realized something was off. She looked up to see that Uji, who had been some distance away just moments ago, was now standing right in front of her. "Ah!" Maiko jumped back several steps, startled. "Am I that scary?" It was understandable. After all, she had just seen him swallow a soul. To be honest, Riji himself was still a bit taken aback by how he managed to devour that soul. Fortunately, he didn't have to actually chew on it piece by piece, otherwise, he might have been overwhelmed. Since he noticed that Maiko had been following him, he decided to approach her directly. "Why, yes, I'm sorry." Maiko stammered, now realizing that the boy in front of her, who seemed to be about her age, didn't appear to be a bad person. She slowly calmed down. "I didn't mean anything by it. I live around here too. It's fine." Seeing Maiko flustered and trying to explain herself, Riji waved his hand dismissively. He didn't mind at all. If it weren't for her, he might never have triggered his system. In a way, he owed her. "When I first saw those monsters, I was shocked too. Right? After all, she was just a regular high school girl. Seeing something that bizarre for the first time naturally made her terrified. It was a completely normal reaction. Most importantly, Maiko hadn't had anyone to talk to about what she was seeing until now. And now, someone else was in the same boat as her. Maiko immediately seized the opportunity, her curiosity bursting forth. "What exactly are those monsters? Why can't anyone else see them? What happened on the bus just now?" Seeing her barrage of questions, Riji waved his hand to calm her down. "Sorry, I'm just too curious." Maiko apologized, realizing she might have come on too strong. Her face flushed, and she lowered her head. Hi. I'm Yatsuya Maiko, a student at Sobya High School." She hadn't introduced herself yet. "My name is Riji Hoshino. Like you, I'm also a student at Sobya High School." Judging by Maiko's reaction, she had probably only just started seeing these strange creatures. She didn't have the dark circles under her eyes that would indicate long-term insomnia from constant encounters with the supernatural. Her demeanor wasn't gloomy either. In fact, she was a typical high school girl with a nice figure and pleasant appearance. As for those things, they're probably similar to the ones you see in horror movies. But they can only attack us if they realize we can see them. So that's how it works. Maiko nodded in understanding. It matched the conclusion she had been forming herself. Then she hesitated, wanting to ask more about what had happened on the bus. But she wasn't sure if it would upset Riji. Riji noticed her hesitation and spoke up. "I don't really know what happened back there either. I just felt that I was in danger and instinctively used that ability." Of course, Riji wasn't going to reveal anything about the system to her. "I see. It sounded like those scenes in anime where the protagonist suddenly unlocks a hidden power when their life is in danger. What about me? Will I have an ability like that too?" For a moment, Maiko got lost in her daydreams. Seeing her deep in thought, Riji shook his head silently. He had seen the anime she was from, and he knew Yatsuya Maiko didn't have any special abilities aside from her unfortunate talent of seeing these supernatural entities. Poor girl. Just plain unlucky. "We're here." Riji stopped in front of a two-story building. Based on his memories, this was his home. Huh? Maiko blinked and then realized something. Riji lived not far from her own house. For some reason, this realization made her a little excited. Maybe it was because they could both see the same terrifying creatures. It felt like she and Riji belonged to the same world now, a kind of secret bond between them. Well, I should head home then. She wanted to ask for his contact information but felt a bit embarrassed to do so since they had just met. Instead, she quickly bid him farewell and hurried away. What a bizarre day. Riji thought as he watched her retreating figure. First, he had traveled to another world, then he met an anime heroine, and now he had awakened a system with incredible powers. All in all, knowing he had the system made Riji feel much more at ease. The confusion he had felt after suddenly being transported to this world was starting to fade. Taking out his key, he opened the door and stepped inside. Chapter 5, Unlucky girl, sure enough, being the parent of a reincarnator is the most dangerous job. Looking at the familiar house from his memories, Rigi couldn't help but sigh. The original body's parents had met with an accident during a trip, leaving Rigi with only this house and nearly $1 million in savings. At least the savings are enough to get me through college. He smiled. Not bad. At least it was better than having nothing. Taking advantage of the quiet moment, Rigi took the opportunity to assess his current condition. I don't feel hungry at all. In fact, I feel pretty full. It seems that this soul-devouring ability requires a digestion process. Not only that, but during the digestion process, Rigi could feel his strength gradually increasing. I guess as my strength improves, the speed of digestion and the number of spirits I can devour will also increase. It made sense. No matter how powerful the ability, it still required a process of leveling up. Nothing happens overnight. Once digestion is complete, I can continue to devour spirits. There are plenty of weird creatures in Yotsuya Maiko's world, even some disguised as gods. If I swallow them, my strength would improve significantly. Rigi grinned to himself. This is getting exciting. I might even be getting a little greedy. But he reminded himself to be patient. His soul-devouring ability was a rare, powerful skill. The power it could bring was limitless, as long as he kept devouring. Sooner or later, he would become truly invincible. Who needs beef when I can devour spirits? The next morning, after waking up, Rigi found that the feeling of fullness had completely disappeared, indicating that the digestion process was over. He looked at his reflection in the mirror, admiring the sharper lines of his muscles and a lighter feeling in his body. He nodded in satisfaction. After packing his things, he headed out. Since he could unlock talents from protagonists, it was only logical for him to attend school himself. He had no idea what other opportunities might await. As soon as he stepped out the door, he saw Maiko walking toward him. Good morning, he called out, intending to greet her. But something was off. Maiko didn't look like herself. Her head was down, and she walked in silence, clearly troubled. Beside her was a strange figure, a spirit lingering around her. Can you see me? Can you see me? The eerie voice of the spirit repeated itself. Good grief, Rigi thought. Being the protagonist must be tough, getting harassed by these weird spirits first thing in the morning. Hoshino-kun. Noticing him, Maiko raised her head, her golden eyes brimming with tears as if she might break down at any moment. She had thought her house was a safe space, but last night, yet another spirit had appeared at home, preventing her from getting any sleep. Now, seeing Rigi felt like a miracle, like she had finally found a savior. Leave it to me, Rigi said, giving her a reassuring smile. Just in time, he had finished digesting the spirit from yesterday. Can you see me? Can you see me? The spirit continued its eerie chant, still lingering around Yotsuya Maiko, oblivious to the danger it was in. Yeah, I can see you. The sudden response from Rigi made the spirit freeze in surprise. It turned around to face him, its eyes quickly morphing into something ferociously sinister. Kill. Knowing that it had been spotted, the spirit immediately tried to attack. Soul devouring. In an instant, the space behind Rigi twisted, and a crack appeared. Chain shot out from the crack, wrapping tightly around the spirit and dragging it into the abyss. This time, the spirit didn't even have a chance to struggle. Unlike the one from yesterday, this one was swallowed whole without resistance. Burp. Rigi let out a burp, patting his stomach with a satisfied grin. Having done this once before, he was already becoming skilled at using his ability. I'm full. He chuckled, watching the space behind him return to normal. Unlike the last time, this time he felt just right, not too full, but completely satisfied. Thank you. Thank you, Hoshino-kun. Maiko's eyes sparkled with gratitude and admiration, almost as if she were worshipping him. She had spent the entire night hoping she might awaken some sort of special ability. But after a full night of trying, Yotsuya Maiko had to accept the disappointing reality that her only talent was being able to see these spirits. Other than that, she was powerless. It's nothing, Rigi replied casually. Besides, helping you also helps me get stronger. You don't have to be so formal. Just call me Rigi. Maiko blushed slightly. Calling someone by their first name was a sign of closeness. Then, Rigi-kun, she said shyly. You can call me Maiko. Hearing her say that, Rigi noticed her face turning redder. However, the warmth in her tone didn't feel awkward. It was as if using first names made her happy. Alright, let's head to school, Maiko. It's getting late. Maiko wasn't usually this quiet, but she hadn't slept well the night before. Her mood was understandably low, and she seemed a bit sluggish. But when she was with Rigi, she made an effort to start conversations. So, do you have monsters like that around your house too? Rigi already knew the answer from watching the anime, but he still asked, pretending to be curious. Yeah. Miko nodded quickly. I see them all the time. Even when I'm in bed or in the bathroom. No wonder you didn't get any sleep last night. Bathroom? Ryuji raised an eyebrow and glanced at her playfully. Miko, feeling flustered under his gaze, quickly explained with her face turning bright red. I didn't take a shower last night, but I don't smell, okay? She lowered her head and sniffed herself, convinced that she still smelled pleasant. I didn't say anything, Ryuji said with an amused smile. But, he added with a grin, if you want to take a bath and finally get some sleep, I'll come over tonight to help you out. Really? Is that okay? Miko's face lit up with surprise and excitement. In fact, she had been too embarrassed to ask for his help. They had only just met after all. Now that Ryuji had offered, she was thrilled. Of course, it's no problem. Besides, Miko is so beautiful. If I keep helping her like this, maybe I'll win her heart. He joked inwardly, but in reality, it would also make things easier for him. Knowing the exact location of the spirits would allow him to swallow them more efficiently. Chapter 1. Oi, madam, you don't want your son to be bullied at the Ninja Academy, right? Hidden Leaf Village Year 52. It has been a year since the Nine-Tails attack. The wounds left by the demon fox are slowly healing, and the village is gradually regaining its former liveliness. Madam, you don't want your child to be bullied at the Ninja Academy, do you? In the bustling commercial district, in front of a dango shop. The shop owner, Spamiko, stared in disbelief at the little boy before her. He had black hair, black eyes, delicate features, and was as adorable as an exquisitely crafted doll. She couldn't believe such threatening words had come from his mouth. The young woman forced a smile. Little one, if you don't have money, it's okay. Just go home, bring it next time, and... Before she could finish, a chubby little boy ran out from the back room, crying and begging her not to take the money. Miko instantly realized the child's words were not empty threats. In the end, at her son's request, not only did she waive the payment for the dango, but she also added a few extra sticks of three-color dango. The little boy smiled in satisfaction. Andy, you're quite understanding. Don't worry, I'll take care of your son at school from now on. My name is Shimura Yami. With that, the little boy turned and left, carrying the takeout box as he disappeared into the crowd. Miko stood frozen for a long while before anxiously looking at her son, who let out a relieved sigh. Taro, has that kid been bullying you at school? The boy, Spataro, weakly shook his head. No. No. But Shimura Yami is the grandson of the Hokage's advisor. Anyone who offends him has a miserable time. Taro shuddered as he recalled those classmates who had been beaten so badly they couldn't attend school for a whole week. It was terrifying. Not only did the teachers refrain from punishing Yami, but they even praised his combat skills. If Mom had taken the money today, wouldn't he have been the next one to be beaten? Hokage's advisor? Miko was stunned. That's a high-ranking official. Shimura. No wonder. Even though she wasn't a ninja, Miko knew that this was a powerful clan in the village. Shimura Yami. Miko silently committed the name to memory. For the sake of her son's well-being and their livelihood in the village, she decided that as long as Shimura Yami visited her shop, she wouldn't charge him a single ryo. At the same time. Ding, congratulations. You have established a fear bond with Spamiko and Spataro. Reward Grandmaster of Dango making an 0.1 standard unit gain in chakra, a system prompt echoed in Shimura Yami's mind. Seeing the reward, the corner of his mouth twitched. This system is seriously unreliable. Shimura Yami was a reincarnator, someone who had traveled to this world, a world of the 5 great shinobi villages' struggle for supremacy. The first thing he saw after being born was a woman giving him a gentle smile before closing her eyes forever. His father had died in battle while his mother was still pregnant with him. The classic orphaned protagonist setup. But unlike others, he had something else, a grandfather named Shimura Danzō. In this world, almost every major villain had their share of devoted apologists. Obito Uchiha, the obsessive simp. Madara Uchiha, the unstoppable warlord. Even those who slaughtered their own kin and took on 7 opponents alone were glorified. But Shimura Danzō. Not only did no one defend him, but even those who excused other villains blamed everything on him instead. The title Nabokage was well deserved. To be honest, when Yami first learned his identity, his future looked bleak. But after a few days of pondering in his nanny's arms, he had a change of heart. Actually, it's not that bad. Compared to many other reincarnators who landed in the Naruto world, his starting position was decent. Look at all the talented prodigies, sooner or later, Danzō would set his sights on them. But him? As long as he survived any potential assassinations from enemy villages, his childhood would be smooth sailing. And by the time the main plot began, if he avoided the front lines of the 4th Great Ninja War, he could safely coast through it. Heck, he could even enjoy a blissful dream inside the infinite Sakami while the world sorted itself out. As for facing consequences? Impossible. As a classic shonen protagonist, neither Naruto nor Sasuke would hold a grudge against him for Danzō's actions. Life's good. Once he realized this, Yami stopped worrying and embraced his role as the eldest son of the Shimura clan. After all, Hidden Leaf Village might be led by Sarutobi Hiruzen, but face mattered to him. Danzō, on the other hand, wasn't Hokage. He had no such concerns. Because of this, while Sarutobi Azuma was strictly disciplined and often clashed with his father, Yami enjoyed the privileges of being the village's #1 second-generation heir. Even Konohamaru's future antics wouldn't compare to his status. And of course, being a reincarnator came with perks. Ever since birth, he had a progress bar in his mind. Then, 3 days ago, on his 6th birthday, his system finally activated. The strongest shinobi bond system. By establishing a bond with someone, he could extract a unique trait from them as a reward. These traits could be chakra nature affinities, innate talents, chakra reserves, mastery over a specific jutsu. The depth of the bond and the strength of the other person determined the quality of the rewards. For instance, just now, he had exchanged names with the dango shop owner and left a deep impression, successfully forming a bond. If he strengthened this connection, he could earn additional rewards. However, seeing the grandmaster of dango making skill he just received, Yami immediately lost interest in pursuing a deeper relationship with the shopkeeper. "Young master, it's time for your training." A man with a faint presence, wearing sunglasses, suddenly appeared behind him. Despite the bustling crowd, no one even glanced his way. A Burame Seiji. A root shinobi, with the rank of Takubatsu Jonin, assigned as Yami's personal bodyguard. He also had a partner, Yamanaka Ryo, who remained hidden at all times. Even now, Yami had never managed to spot him. "Got it." Yami responded lazily before spotting another shop run by a classmate's family. Using the same tactic, he established 2 more bonds and walked away with a bag of round fans. Introduction to round fan crafting, standard gain in chakra plus 0.1, satisfied, he left the commercial district and returned to the Shimura clan's estate. Chapter 2, System Panel, The Legacy Left by Parents. Young Master Yami, today we will focus on chakra extraction training. In the courtyard of a wooden house, Yami listened attentively as his tutor, Ebiki, explained the techniques and key points of chakra extraction. What is a Takubatsu Jonin? They are shinobi whose abilities fall between Chunin and Jonin. Those promoted to Jonin due to exceptional talent in a specialized field are classified as Takubatsu Jonin. Ebiki was one such ninja, rising to his rank due to his expertise in education. His knowledge and teaching experience in chakra extraction far exceeded that of the instructors at the Ninja Academy. At this stage, the gap between clan-born shinobi and civilian shinobi was already becoming apparent. With the same physical fitness and mental energy, clan-born shinobi could extract chakra more efficiently. They not only had a larger chakra reserve but also a faster recovery rate compared to ordinary shinobi. Civilians had no choice but to rely on their intelligence to compete against the power of established clans. To become stronger, they had to find skilled mentors. However, top-tier mentors were almost always from prestigious ninja clans. Over time, this divide naturally formed factions within the shinobi world. Although Yami had both a cheat-like ability and a powerful family background, he never slacked off in his training. In fact, he trained even harder than most. At the end of the day, this was a world where strength determined everything. Without power, even if others showed him respect, it would only be superficial. Or worse, out of fear. In his past life, he had been just an ordinary person. Now that he had the resources, he wanted to fight for his own destined future. That said, he only started training seriously at the age of 5. Chakra was a form of energy created by extracting the life force within cells and mixing it with mental energy in a precise ratio. Overexerting oneself at a young age wasn't always beneficial. Sometimes, restraint was necessary. The 2-hour lesson passed quickly. After exchanging bows as a sign of gratitude, Ebiki took his leave. He was very satisfied with Yami as a student. Not only was Yami the grandson of Danzō, an influential figure comparable to the Hokage himself, but more importantly, he was intelligent and quick to grasp concepts. Unlike other young shinobi, who required constant emotional management, teaching Yami never felt like babysitting. Meanwhile, Yami returned to his room. A servant soon arrived, bringing his dinner along with a prepared nutritional herbal tonic. Frowning slightly, he downed the bitter medicine in one gulp before starting his meal. From a scientific perspective, the number of times a cell could divide in a lifetime was limited. Using chakra in battle essentially meant burning through that limit faster. However, even without chakra extraction, cellular division continued as usual. In most cases, aging and death were caused by organ failure rather than hitting the absolute limit of cell replication. As long as chakra usage was controlled and proper self-care was maintained, normal battles wouldn't significantly impact lifespan. This was something Yami had learned from his grandfather, Shimura Danzō. The old man was getting up in years, but his ambition remained strong. Even now, he still dreamed of becoming Hokage, which made him obsessively invested in health maintenance. If it were anyone else, it would have been an inspiring tale of an old man chasing his dreams. But unfortunately, after dinner, Yami returned to his quarters. He had no idea what his grandfather had been up to lately. The old man hadn't appeared in the past few days. Aside from the servants and guards, Yami was the only one living in this massive estate. Lying on his bed, he activated the system panel with a thought and switched to his personal attributes page. Status panel, name, Shimura Yami, gender, male, age, 6 years old, date of birth, April 1st, year 46, Hidden Leaf Village calendar, chakra attributes, fire, genius, wind, genius, yang, excellent, total chakra, 6.1 standard gain in units, chakra control talent, genius, mastered ninjutsu, 3 basic jutsu, proficient, wind style, great breakthrough, normal, fire style, great fireball, normal, nature transformation, none, special talents, father's expectations, mother's love, senju bloodline, thin, underdevelopment, swordsmanship genius, stealth, dango making, round fan making, strength evaluation, the schoolyard bully, you're the one who does the bullying, and no one dares mess with you. For someone with a cheat system, this panel wasn't impressive. However, considering that he had only unlocked the system a few days ago, and aside from 1 standard gain in unit of chakra obtained through the system, everything else had been earned through his own efforts, this progress was quite good. For a 6-year-old, he had already reached the graduation standard. The system categorized attributes and ninjutsu mastery into different levels, talent ranks, ordinary good excellent genius ultimate limit break ninjutsu proficiency, beginner normal proficient mastery ultimate limit break. A genius level talent was on par with Kakashi Hatake, one of Hidden Leaf Village's brightest young prodigies. An ultimate talent was at the level of the 3rd Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen, the so-called professor of ninjutsu. Judging from his current panel, Yami's future potential capped at Elite Jonin. With great effort, he might barely touch Kage-level strength. But then, his eyes locked onto the first 2 talents in the special talents section. And he froze. Father's expectations. Your deceased father, whom you have never met, had high expectations for you. Effect: all existing attribute talents are upgraded by 1 level. Mother's love. A mother's love is the greatest gift in the world. Before passing away, she left you her most precious blessing. This talent is divided into 3 stages. 1. Stage 1. Unlocks the Senju bloodline from your maternal lineage. Develops automatically with age. Effect expires upon adulthood. 2. Stage 2. After officially becoming a shinobi, all talents increase by 1 level, upper limits can be broken, certain special talents are unaffected. 3. Stage 3. Upon reaching adulthood, 16 years old, you will continue to receive your mother's blessing, your chakra reserves will double. Parental love. Yami thought back to the gentlewoman he had only met once. His feelings were complicated. He knew that his mother was from the Senju clan. Back in the day, Senju Dobirama had encouraged marriages between the Senju clan and both civilian ninjas and other ninja clans. Though this weakened their short-term military strength, it greatly increased the likelihood of producing talented civilian-born shinobi. However, awakening the Senju bloodline was no simple matter. His mother had left him the greatest gift she could. She had filled in the missing novice package that the system never provided. Chapter 3, the 5.5th Hokage. The next day, since today was a day off, Yami slept in, not getting up until noon. Ebiki wouldn't be coming today, but that didn't mean Yami planned to slack off. Going into the village to establish new bonds was too inefficient, it was better to train at home. The system required 3 conditions for a bond to form. 1. Both parties must meet face to face. 2. Both parties must know each other's names. 3. Yami must leave a deep impression on the other party. So far, only the rewards left by his parents had been exceptions to these rules. Right now, in the eyes of adults, Yami was just a child, not worth taking seriously. Meeting the 3rd condition was still difficult. Otherwise, his 2 personal guards, Aburame Seiji and Yamanaka Ryo, would have already provided a bond. To them, Yami was simply a mission objective, not someone significant. Currently, the best place to gain rewards was still the Ninja Academy. For example, he had obtained his fire style affinity from a classmate. If he was lucky, he might one day acquire all 5 chakra natures. and even the yin-release affinity. Yami stepped into the courtyard, picking up a child-sized dagger that had been specially crafted for him. He began practicing the most basic slashes. In this world, swords and knives weren't strictly differentiated. However, in Yami's eyes, they were all just blades. Even the so-called Kusanagi sword was still a knife to him. That said, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. He wouldn't argue over trivial naming conventions. With his swordsmanship talent, he would be able to reach the ultimate level once he became a Genin. It would be a waste not to train diligently. No matter how strong a shinobi was, most were still mortals. A sword could kill just as efficiently as ninjutsu, if not more. Most ninjas didn't know many jutsu, so they relied primarily on taijutsu and ninja tools in battle. Jutsu were used to gain an advantage or secure a one-hit kill. Do you really think everyone could throw Rasengans around like they were basic attacks? Whoosh! Whoosh! The sound of swinging steel echoed through the courtyard as the warm sunlight shone down, glistening off the beads of sweat on Yami's forehead. His training continued from after lunch until sunset, only stopping when a deep voice called out from behind him. Yami! Yami turned around to see a tall, wrinkled old man standing there. A bandage covered his left eye, and his face bore a gloomy, cold aura. Yet, when he looked at Yami, he smiled. It was a stiff smile. Likely because he wasn't used to smiling at all. This man was Shimura Danzō. The darkness of the shinobi world. The 5.5th Hokage. The strongest Nabokage in history. Old man, you're back. Yami greeted him casually. Since he had learned to talk, he had always called Danzō old man. Never once addressing him as grandfather. Danzō didn't mind. Or rather, caring wouldn't change anything. He could be ruthless to outsiders, plotting against anyone. But Yami was his only remaining family. His sole blood relative. And the key to his ambitions. Not only did Danzō want Yami to inherit root, but he also hoped Yami would one day become Hokage. And based on Yami's current talent, he was not disappointed. His growth was nearly identical to Kakashi's, having already reached the graduation standard not long after enrolling in the Ninja Academy. If only. He had a KK Genkai. Danzō's visible eye dimmed. No matter how strong an ordinary shinobi was, there was always a limit. Only Sharingan or Wood style could allow Yami, and by extension, himself, to surpass those limits. Just as Yami greeted Danzō, two system prompts rang in his mind. Bond established with Shimura Danzō. Reward acquired, Wind style affinity, genius, bond with Shimura Danzō strengthened to stage 2. Reward acquired, Wind style nature transformation, mastery. This was the first time Yami had met Danzō since activating the system, so it made sense that the rewards had only triggered now. The two rewards merged, subtly altering Yami's aura, making it sharper and more fierce. Especially the wind-style nature transformation. Danzō was arguably Hidden Leaf Village's strongest wind-style user, and even among the entire ninja world, he was one of the best. After all, not just anyone could cut through Susanoo using wind-infused shuriken. Danzō noticed the change in Yami and snapped out of his thoughts. He slowly walked into the courtyard and stood in the open training space. I have time today. I haven't checked your progress in a while. Show me what you've learned. Huh? Oh. Yami tightened his grip on the short sword and rushed forward without hesitation. A faint aura of compressed air swirled around his blade. Danzō's single eye gleamed with interest. Nature transformation? Good, very good. Mastering nature transformation at age 6? My grandson truly has the makings of a Hokage. In an instant, Yami closed the distance and slashed downward with his short sword. Danzō tilted his body slightly, dodging with ease. Yami immediately followed up with a spinning kick. Danzō raised his arm to block, using the impact to push Yami back slightly. But before he could reset his stance, Yami had already closed in again. Of course, Danzō was an elite jonin at minimum. Even if Yami went all out, he was no threat to him. But Yami wasn't holding back. He unleashed his full strength, using every bit of his swordsmanship and ninjutsu. After all, the one person least likely to harm him in this world was Shimura Danzō. 15 minutes later Yami finally stopped, breathing heavily, his chakra reserves nearly depleted. Danzō, on the other hand, remained completely unscathed. Well done, Yami. But don't let it get to your head. You're just a genius, not a true powerhouse. Danzō's stiff smile finally turned into a genuine grin. Yami's progress far exceeded his expectations. His wind-style nature transformation was already highly refined. His fire-style jutsu were also well executed. If only he had the right eyes. If that happened, Hidden Leaf Village's future would belong to the Shimura clan. Thinking this, Danzō felt even more satisfied and led Yami back inside. During dinner, Halfway through the meal, Yami suddenly looked up and asked, "Old man, you seemed pissed off when you came back. Who pissed you off?" Danzō casually took a bite of rice. "Who else? That old fool, Sarutobi Hiruzen. I failed to assassinate him today, so my Hokage plans are delayed again." Yami. Chapter 4, Terrifying Bond of Danzō and Hiruzen. After listening to Danzō's explanation, Yami finally understood the situation. It turned out that Danzō had disappeared for a while because he was secretly planning to assassinate the Hokage. After the Nine Tails Rebellion, the youngest and most brilliant fourth Hokage, Minato no Mikaze, had perished. The third Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen, once again took charge of Hidden Leaf Village and had no intention of selecting a new Hokage. By procedure, a Hokage must meet with the daimyo and receive official approval. However, due to the attack on Hidden Leaf Village, the village was in ruins, and Sarutobi Hiruzen had delayed his journey to the Land of Fire's capital. Only recently had he begun to arrange the visit. Danzō received this news early and mobilized all of Root's forces to assassinate the third Hokage today. Good news, the assassination succeeded. Bad news, the Hokage they killed was actually a disguise. The real Sarutobi Hiruzen had already seen through Danzō's scheme. Just as Danzō was savoring his victory on the Hokage's throne, Hiruzen suddenly appeared and scared the life out of him. Though Hiruzen didn't punish him, his calm and condescending tone had deeply wounded Danzō's pride. And to make matters worse, he had finally found a shinobi with wood style, but Hiruzen had lured him away. Even now, just recalling it made Danzō curse in frustration. He was so angry that he even scolded Sarutobi Biwako, who had already passed away. Yami felt speechless. "Old man, don't push your luck. If someone else had attempted to assassinate the Hokage, they'd have been executed on the spot. The third Hokage has already been generous by not stripping you of your position as Root's leader. Does he even have the power to do that?" Danzō sneered coldly, an unmistakable arrogance in his expression. "Root is technically part of Anbu, but Hiruzen has no real authority over it. Even if I were officially removed, my subordinates would still follow me. This is what it means to be a proper tool." "Then don't get yourself killed," Yami scoffed. "I'm still a student at the Ninja Academy, that's his territory. He won't touch you." Danzō's voice was firm. "It's just an assassination. It's not like this was my first attempt in the past few decades. When he first became Hokage, I tried to assassinate him once. Later, I attempted to assassinate the fourth Hokage too. What kind of twisted relationship was this?" Listening to his grandfather recount his glorious history, Yami had no idea what kind of expression to make. The power of bonds was truly terrifying. For anyone else, assassinating the Hokage would be a life or death matter. But for Danzō, it was just another way to strengthen his friendship with Hiruzen. Forget it. He didn't want to get involved in the feud between these two old men. As long as it didn't affect him, he didn't care. After dinner, Yami returned to his room to refine his chakra, while Danzō headed back to Root Space. Tapping the ground lightly with his cane, two masked Root ninjas immediately appeared, kneeling on one knee behind him. Danzō remained silent for a moment, deep in thought, before issuing his command in a cold voice. "Gather as much swordsmanship knowledge as possible, from Hidden Leaf Village and other ninja villages. Organize and compile it. Instruct our contacts in Hidden Mist Village to see if they can acquire a sword from the 7 ninja swordsmen." "Understood." One of the ninjas responded and swiftly retreated. Danzō then turned to the remaining operative. "What has Orochimaru been up to lately?" "Orochimaru entered his lab half a month ago and hasn't emerged since." "Either that, or our surveillance capabilities weren't sufficient to track him." Danzō snorted but didn't reprimand the subordinate. Expecting his men to monitor Orochimaru was unrealistic. The man was the most unpredictable of the 3 Sannin, and after the other 2 left the village, his personality had shifted drastically. Right now, their relationship was a delicate cooperation, but Danzō had already decided he would expose Orochimaru's experiments and force him to flee Hidden Leaf Village. After all, conducting human experiments on his own villagers. Not even Hiruzen could cover that up. But before that, Danzō planned to squeeze every last bit of value out of him. Since Yami had a talent for swordsmanship, as his grandfather, it was only natural that he provided the best possible conditions for him. But swordsmanship alone wasn't enough, he needed a famous blade to match it. The first choice was the Sword of the Thunder God, once wielded by Senju Tobirama. Unfortunately, it was now in Hiruzen's possession, making it difficult to obtain. Then, there was Orochimaru's Kusanagi sword. The Kusanagi wasn't a single blade, but a category of legendary swords. Rumor had it that Orochimaru possessed more than one. Danzō was definitely interested. "Let's go," he said as he slowly walked out of Root Space. His movements were slow and deliberate, like an old man past his prime. Prepare a meeting with Orochimaru. I still owe Yami a 6th birthday present. Time passed in the blink of an eye, and it was another school day. With his backpack slung over his shoulders, Yami walked toward the ninja academy. The Shimura clan estate was located outside Hidden Leaf Village's center. Along the way, many clan members greeted him with respect. As he returned their greetings, the system notifications popped up. 0.1 Standard Chunin Chakra, 0.2 Standard Chunin Chakra. The power of the system was slowly becoming evident. 1 Standard Chunin Chakra unit was equivalent to 10 regular gain-in. By the time Yami left the clan compound, his total chakra had already reached 1.3 Standard Chunin units. Along with that, he had obtained several additional wind-style talents. The system allowed for talent fusion, but since the quality was too low and the number was insufficient, his wind-style talent hadn't yet advanced to ultimate level. Even so, it had clearly improved. Upon arriving at the Ninja Academy, several students saw Yami and immediately paled, their expressions filled with fear. Some of them looked as if they were about to cry. Yami barely spared them a glance, walking straight into the classroom and settling into his usual seat by the window. These were the same students who had mocked him for being an orphan because no one came to pick him up. After hearing those insults, Yami had beaten them senseless. They had taken over a week to recover before returning to class. Was the revenge over? Of course not. As long as their parents were ninja, they wouldn't survive this year. They would inevitably die gloriously on the battlefield. By then, they would experience firsthand what it meant to be an orphan. If their parents weren't ninja, well, dealing with them would be even easier. Just as Yami was absent-mindedly watching sparrows on a tree branch, a cheerful voice called out to him. Yami. A lively girl with long black hair ran into the classroom. The moment she spotted him, her eyes lit up, and she immediately rushed over to sit beside him. Yami smiled and reached out to ruffle her hair. Izumi. Chapter 5, Izumi Uchiha. Izumi Uchiha, a girl who truly lived up to her name. She had a gentle personality like a spring breeze, a voice as soft as flowing water, long black hair, and a teardrop-shaped mole at the corner of her eye. One day, she would undoubtedly grow into a rare beauty. She was also Yami's childhood friend, whom he had met the previous year. He had witnessed the Nine Tails Rebellion firsthand. The colossal fox, towering like a mountain, had rampaged outside the village, leaving destruction in its wake. At the time, Yami had been escorted to an underground shelter by several guards, where he happened to encounter a panicked Izumi Uchiha. Naturally, he had stopped the little black-haired girl in her tracks. Originally, Yami had only possessed a wind affinity and a latent yang attribute. His current fire affinity had come from Izumi. Yami. Izumi's face was flushed, her voice tinged with grievance. What were you doing over the break? Why didn't you come to see me? I was busy training, Izumi. Yami sighed dramatically, then shifted his gaze to the figure who had entered the room alongside her. After all, there's a genius like Itachi Uchiha in our class. I have to work hard so I don't bring shame to the Shimura clan. The one who had come in with Izumi was none other than Itachi Uchiha, the ninja world's most devoted filial son. There were many orphans in the shinobi world, but Itachi Uchiha was unique in how he actively made himself one. Yami had to respect the dedication. You're a genius too, Yami. Izumi quickly encouraged him, her tone full of admiration. She wasn't wrong. Before Itachi awakened his Sharingan, Yami might have even been stronger than him. But after unlocking his eyes, Itachi had become a cheat, skyrocketing to Kage level in just a few years. Itachi Uchiha frowned slightly. He had always sensed a certain hostility from Shimura Yami. Disdain toward the Uchiha clan was common, especially after the Nine Tails attack. Many people had seen the Sharingan reflected in the beast's eyes, further fueling their suspicion. But Yami was different. His hostility seemed directed at Itachi alone rather than the entire Uchiha clan. Otherwise, he wouldn't get along so well with Izumi. You're not inferior to me in strength, Shimura. We should both continue to work hard and contribute to the village as soon as possible. Itachi paused briefly before offering these polite words and continuing on his way. Yami watched his retreating figure, unable to determine whether it was the real Itachi or just a shadow clone. He felt the urge to test it. Yami, what are you looking at? Izumi asked curiously. Nothing. Yami turned back to her with a smile. I wasn't able to spend time with you last weekend. How about we go fishing together next week? Izumi's eyes immediately brightened, her attention successfully diverted. Where should we go? How about the river in Training Ground 35? The scenery there is really nice. I'll leave it up to you, Yami replied with a grin. Danzō didn't particularly like his close relationship with Izumi Uchiha. They had even argued over it before. But since Yami insisted, Danzō had refrained from using any underhanded methods to interfere. Perhaps, in his eyes, a marginal Uchiha like Izumi was insignificant, someone harmless who couldn't affect the grand scheme of things. Even so, he never missed an opportunity to indoctrinate Yami with the belief that the Uchiha clan was inherently evil. Yami had long grown tired of hearing it. Not long after, the school bell rang, and their homeroom teacher, Kazama Shuichi, walked in. "Alright, class. Today, we'll be learning how to throw ninja tools." Kazama Shuichi wasted no time with pointless lectures or propaganda. Unlike in the future, where the academy's curriculum shamelessly brainwashed students into believing that the third Hokage was the strongest in history, the current era was still a time of war. Minato Namikage's ascension to Hokage in Hidden Leaf Village Year 50 had only marked the end of large-scale battles. In reality, aside from the utterly defeated Hidden Sand Village, the other villages had never truly stopped fighting. Although outright wars had ceased, small-scale skirmishes remained constant, keeping the shinobi world in a state of tension. These students were future military assets, so there was no time for empty rhetoric. The instructors focused on teaching real combat knowledge and survival skills. Kazama Shuichi scribbled formulas on the blackboard, breaking down the parabolic trajectories of thrown weapons while explaining various shuriken throwing techniques. The first class was all theory. The second was a practical session, also taught by Shuichi. Yami led his classmates out of the classroom toward the training grounds for their hands-on practice. Since there weren't enough targets for everyone, the students paired up. Naturally, Yami was partnered with Izumi. Itachi, on the other hand, was paired with some random classmate. He picked up 3 shuriken and casually flicked them forward. Clang! The projectiles collided midair, ricocheting off each other before embedding into the bullseye in a strangely precise pattern, causing a wave of admiration from the students. Amazing. He hit all 3. As expected of an Uchiha. He's so strong. Itachi is so cool. Who should I pick, him or Yami? You? Please. You've been eating too much candy lately. I can't let you get carried away. Who's going to knock some sense into her? Izumi ignored the chatter, focusing on her own technique. Though she didn't show off like Itachi, she still landed her shuriken perfectly in the red circle at the center. Not bad, Izumi. Yami praised her sincerely. The little girl beamed with delight and stepped aside. You're even better than me, Yami. That's right. Watch closely. Yami smiled as he retrieved a shuriken from his pouch. Their instructor, Kazama Shuichi, also turned his attention toward him. Shimura Yami and Itachi Uchiha were considered the top 2 geniuses in their class, both hailing from prestigious clans. Itachi had just demonstrated his impressive skill. Now, it was Yami's turn. 1 second later. Boom. Several targets suddenly exploded, sending students into a panic. Kazama Shuichi's eyes bulged in shock. Why? Why was there an explosive tag on your shuriken? He had seen it clearly. Yami's shuriken had barely grazed the target, but the explosive tag attached to it had detonated, destroying several nearby targets in the process. Yami looked completely unfazed. It increases the margin for error. If I miss my target, the explosive tag still ensures I hit something. He turned to Shuichi, his expression calm. So? Did it hit or not? Kazama Shuichi. Chapter 6, The Big Fat Sheep Shimura. The purpose of the shuriken training class is to improve your throwing accuracy. Wouldn't it be meaningless to use explosive tags? Even though Yami's background wasn't simple, Kazama Shuichi still couldn't help but lecture him. The cost of an explosive tag was around 300 ryo, and during wartime, the price would rise due to material shortages. 300 ryo could buy 3 bowls of ikiraku ramen, not exactly a small amount. Most shinobi only carried a few hundred ryo when they went on missions. Equipping each shuriken with an explosive tag would be far too extravagant. The mission rewards wouldn't even cover the expenses. Yami waved his hand dismissively. Sensei, as long as I achieve my goal, does it matter how I do it? It's just an explosive tag. I can afford tens of thousands of them. Kazama Shuichi was momentarily speechless. Host establishes a bond with Kazama Shuichi. I have a rich student. Reward, Earth-style chakra, good. Host establishes a fear bond with classmate A. Reward, 0.1 standard gain in chakra. Host achieves a speechless bond with classmate B. Reward, swordsmanship talent, normal. The system notifications rang one after another, and Yami narrowed his eyes in amusement. Of course, he had already mastered shuriken throwing. It could even be considered one of his better skills. But in order to grow stronger and leave a lasting impression, Yami had to do something unexpected. By now, he had almost completed all the first stage bond achievements in class. Except for one. Yami glanced at Itachi, who remained expressionless, and narrowed his eyes slightly. As expected of Itachi, The boy who started contemplating the meaning of life at 4 years old. His emotions were remarkably stable. In the blink of an eye, school was over. Yami, Izumi, and Itachi walked out of the academy together. At Izumi's invitation, Yami was heading to her house for dinner. The two chatted and laughed along the way, completely ignoring Itachi, who was walking silently beside them. Yami was well aware of Itachi's family situation. It wasn't exactly ideal. Izumi's father had been an outsider, a foreign shinobi who had married into the Uchiha clan. He had died protecting her during the Nine Tails attack. Her mother was just an ordinary Uchiha, with only Chunin-level strength, and she hadn't even awakened the Sharingan. Clans like Uchiha and Hyuga placed great importance on preserving their bloodlines, leading to frequent intermarriages. If Izumi's father hadn't married into the family, there would have been no possibility between them at all. Even so, their family still wasn't well received by the other Uchiha, often facing exclusion. Stop right there. This is Uchiha territory, outsiders are not allowed to enter. Two Uchiha guards stood at the entrance like gatekeepers, blocking Yami and Izumi with arrogant expressions, as if they were the rulers of the world. There were reasons why the Uchiha clan had a bad reputation. Beyond the fear and schemes of the higher-ups, the Uchiha themselves contributed to the issue. They looked down on others as if the rest of Hidden Leaf Village were beneath them. Who would like people like that? Senpai, Yami is my friend, Izumi quickly explained, but the two guards simply shook their heads coldly. Rules are rules. He can't enter. You can go in by yourself. Yami chuckled. If someone knew nothing, they'd think Uchiha owns Hidden Leaf Village. But I can walk into the Hokage's office whenever I want. Are you guys planning to declare independence? The two guards' faces darkened instantly, and even Itachi, walking behind them, had a subtle change in expression. Before he could speak, a deep and authoritative voice came from the entrance. You must be joking. The Uchiha are, of course, part of Hidden Leaf Village, and we always welcome friends. The guards turned around, only to break out in cold sweat when they saw who had arrived. With stiff postures, they bowed their heads respectfully. Clan head Fugaku. Father, Itachi greeted. Fugaku merely nodded at his son before walking past the two guards. With a friendly smile, he approached Yami and Izumi, his tone warm. You must be Shimura Yami. Itachi often mentions you. Welcome to the Uchiha clan. Really? Yami tilted his head with a look of innocent confusion. Then why were those two uncles so mean? They misunderstood my intentions, Fugaku quickly explained. The guards are here to identify potential spies, not to keep out friends. TSK. Yami shook his head and sighed. What's the point of having subordinates who don't even understand orders? Maybe I should ask my grandfather to train them for a few days. I guarantee they'll follow orders properly after that. He's really good at this kind of thing. Fugaku's smile stiffened. Let Danzō train them. If those two guards went through Danzō's training, they'd probably come back blind or worse. No need to trouble Lord Danzō. I'll discipline them myself, Fugaku said quickly. He then turned to glare at the two guards, his Sharingan nearly activating out of frustration. Ding. Host establishes a hostile bond with Hero Uchiha. Reward, Yin release chakra, good. Host establishes a hostile bond with Takashi Uchiha. Reward, Yin release chakra, good. Host establishes a bond with Fugaku Uchiha. Reward, Yin release chakra, genius. Host establishes a bond with Itachi Uchiha. Reward, special talent 1 on 7 combat talent. Yami's body tensed as the notifications came in. He quickly instructed the system to hold off on merging the rewards for now, keeping his composure as he smiled at Fugaku. Then, he turned his gaze toward Itachi, his eyes gleaming with interest. A fat sheep. If Kakashi was known as 50-50 for being evenly matched with nearly anyone he fought, then Itachi Uchiha was the exact opposite. Against weaker opponents, he could annihilate them instantly. Against stronger foes, he could use his Mengekyo Sharingan and exceptional tactical intelligence to turn the tide of battle. Or even claim victory. The Mengekyo Sharingan certainly played a key role, but his pure combat talent shouldn't be underestimated either. Sasuke had ruined his eyes after just 2 days of using the Mengekyo, yet Itachi had endured for years. That difference was telling. Even if Yami wasn't fond of Itachi's dutiful son persona, he had to admit. It was undeniable. Itachi Uchiha, like Minato no Mikaze, had reached the peak of Kage-level strength. Chapter 7, Complications. After watching the two children leave, the smile on Fugaku's face gradually faded, replaced by a cold, stern expression as he fixed his gaze on the two guards. Starting next week, your workload will double. Notify everyone. No one is allowed to stop Shimura from entering. The two Uchiha guards shivered slightly but quickly acknowledged the order and returned to their posts. Fugaku took his son home, reminding him along the way, "Itachi, make sure to build a good relationship with Shimura at school. His attitude is crucial in easing tensions between our clan and the village leadership." Though Itachi was only 6 years old, his maturity far exceeded that of an ordinary child, and Fugaku treated him accordingly. "Yes, father," Itachi replied respectfully, fully understanding the weight of his father's words. Seeing his son's agreement, Fugaku allowed himself a faint smile of relief. But soon, his expression turned grim again. The current situation gave him no reason to feel at ease. The isolation of the Uchiha clan was becoming more severe, their compound monitored constantly by the village's upper echelon. Fugaku wasn't certain whether this was Danzō's doing or the third Hokage's, but regardless, he could only feign ignorance and endure. His true hatred was reserved for the masked man who had manipulated the Nine Tails. If not for the Nine Tails attack, the Uchiha wouldn't have been further ostracized, and the fourth Hokage wouldn't have died young. Minato Namikaze was not only exceptionally talented but also an upright, radiant figure, completely unlike Hiruzen or Danzō, those old, scheming politicians. More importantly, Minato had no prejudice against the Uchiha. He had even taken an Uchiha as his disciple. But now, he was dead. In the single year that Minato served as Hokage, tensions between the village and the Uchiha had eased significantly, giving Fugaku hope of bridging the gap. Yet that hope was shattered in a single night, and things only worsened afterward. Now, not only did he have to contend with Hiruzen, Danzō, and the other village elders' suspicion and hostility, but he also had to manage the growing radicalism within his own clan, balancing both sides in an increasingly impossible position. Still, the appearance of Yami and his close bond with Izumi gave Fugaku a sliver of hope. Danzō had no relatives left in this world aside from Yami. If Fugaku could extend Uchiha's goodwill through Yami and use him to establish a connection with Danzō. With that thought, Fugaku glanced at Itachi with newfound expectations. Meanwhile, Yami, who was accompanying Izumi, had no idea that Fugaku was setting his sights on him. He simply assumed that Fugaku's earlier show of friendliness was just to save face for Danzō. But even if he had known, he would have laughed it off. It wasn't something worth worrying about. At this point, no one in the world could resolve the conflict between Hidden Lee Village and the Uchiha. The only one who could have, Minato Namikaze, had died last year. The seeds of this discord had been planted long ago during the reign of Senju Tobirama. The students he mentored had inherited his distrust of the Uchiha. Even if Yami was Danzō's grandson, it wouldn't change anything. Not even Danzō himself could reconcile with the Uchiha. Hiruzen may have seemed like a weak-willed pacifist, but he was actually the one who feared the Uchiha the most. An independent, powerful armed force was the biggest threat to any leader lacking true control. Then there were the two old geezers, Yutain Koharu and Mitokado Hamura. Tobirama's former students, deeply influenced by his teachings. They, too, had no fondness for the Uchiha. There was no one in Hidden Lee Village's upper ranks who had a positive view of them. And the Uchiha themselves had their own issues. Their arrogance, cultivated over years of managing the village's security, made it impossible for them to lower their heads and compromise. Fugaku was indeed a capable leader, but without overwhelming strength or the courage to act decisively, what could he really change? All he could do was quietly wait for the day his dutiful son would bring about change. "Izumi, Yami, it's time to eat," a gentle female voice called from outside the room. The two children exchanged smiles, put down their pens, and walked out. Izumi's mother, Kimi Uchiha, was naturally a kind and gentle woman. After all, she had raised such a thoughtful, black-haired, straight-laced little girl like Izumi. As they entered the dining area, Kimi urged them to wash their hands first. Meanwhile, she set the table with grilled fish, sushi, and 3 bowls of miso soup. When Yami returned from washing up, Kimi smiled warmly at him. "I didn't know you'd be coming today, so I didn't prepare anything special, just some home-cooked dishes." "Not at all. These smell amazing, I'm starving." Yami played up his childlike charm, flashing a bright grin. Sure enough, Kimi's expression softened even more. Mischievous kids could be troublesome, but polite and sensible children were always endearing. "Then eat plenty. You're at an age where you need to grow," she said kindly, pushing a plate of fried fish toward him. In truth, she was deeply grateful to Yami. Not only had he helped Izumi out of her grief last year, but he had also taken extra care of her ever since, helping her gradually overcome the loss of her father. "I want to grow taller too. Time to eat," Izumi declared enthusiastically. The two children exchanged amused glances, breaking into small smiles. Indeed, nothing was as heartwarming as a cheerful little girl. Yami felt quite pleased. Today had been a productive day. Not only had he reaped plenty from Itachi, but Kimi had also given him an unexpected gift. Host establishes a bond with Kami Uchiha. My son-in-law gets more appealing over time. Reward mother-in-law's expectation. Mother-in-law's expectation. When the host and Izumi Uchiha are within 500 meters of each other, both of their training speeds increase by 100%, a training buff. Its value was no less than inheriting Uchiha bloodline talent. The system didn't restrict the type of training it affected, meaning whether it was ninjutsu, taijutsu, or chakra refinement, his growth rate would double. It seemed like he should start considering how to steal Izumi away from the Uchiha clan. Yami's thoughts raced. Of course, it wasn't just a matter of whether Izumi was willing. Danzō would be a significant obstacle on his own. He would have to plan carefully. By the time dinner was over, night had already fallen. Yami stayed a little longer, sparring with Izumi in taijutsu to test the effect of his new buff. Feeling its clear benefits, he eventually bid farewell and left. When he returned home, he was surprised to find Danzō waiting for him. "Old man, why are you back?" Yami asked in surprise. Danzō practically lived at Root. Even when Yami was younger, Danzō had spent more time at the underground base than at home. Yami had used his need for sunlight as an excuse to avoid staying there. Danzō chuckled. "I was in such a hurry last time that I forgot to give you your birthday present." He pushed a simple, long wooden box toward him. "Open it and take a look." Chapter 8, Kusanagi, the special reward brought by the final bond. It's just a birthday present. Was it really worth a special trip? Yami muttered, but still opened the wooden box. Inside was a katana. Slender, sharp, and gleaming coldly, as if it could slice through anything with ease. The hilt was wrapped in a snakeskin-like material to improve grip and friction. Yami's eyes widened. "Is this the Kusanagi sword?" "Not bad." Danzō remained expressionless, but there was a hint of pride in his voice. "Orochimaru heard it was your birthday and asked me to give this to you. Consider it a gift from both of us." "Yami. I don't believe you." As if Orochimaru would be so generous as to just hand me the Kusanagi sword. If he didn't already know what kind of person Orochimaru was, he might have actually believed it. Still, he was touched. Regardless of how Danzō treated outsiders, at least toward his grandson, he showed genuine care. Without any ulterior motives. "Thank you, Grandpa." Danzō froze for a moment. Was this the first time Yami had called him Grandpa? Ding. Host and Shimura Danzō's bond has reached the third stage, final level. Reward, 1 standard Jonin Chakra, special talent Ninja World Darkness. Ninja World Darkness, host can merge into any shadow, achieving concealment comparable to the Mayfly Jutsu. Yami was also momentarily stunned. So just calling him Grandpa was enough to max out the bond? The two stared at each other in silence for a long moment before Danzō coughed to break the awkwardness. "It's getting late, Yami. Go rest. You still have school tomorrow. Remember, don't lose to the Uchiha." "Oh." Yami nodded, picked up the box containing the Kusanagi sword, and walked back to his room. At the same time, he made a decision. Dying while sealing a bridge? Too pathetic. Once he grew stronger, he would take over Root. It was better for this old man to stay home and enjoy retirement. That night, sitting on his bed, Yami played with the Kusanagi sword for a while before going over his gains from the day. Status panel, name, Shimura Yami, gender, male, age, 6 years old, date of birth, April 1st, year 46, Hidden Leaf Village calendar, chakra attributes, fire, genius, wind, genius, yang, excellent, earth, good, yin, genius, total chakra, 1.1 standard Jonin chakra, chakra control talent, genius, mastered ninjutsu, 3 basic jutsus, proficient, wind style, great breakthrough, normal, fire style, great fireball, normal, nature transformation, wind style, mastery, special talents, father's expectations, mother's love, senju bloodline, thin, underdevelopment, swordsmanship genius, stealth mastery, ninja world darkness, mother-in-law's expectation. His progress was nothing short of astonishing. Before today, he was just a promising academy student, a genius among his peers. But now, not only had his chakra reached Jonin level, but he had also gained 2 new chakra natures and 2 special talents. The earth-style chakra wasn't particularly interesting. He had no intention of training it unless he had genius-level talent for it. The yin release chakra, however, was an entirely different story. Yin release was a rare and valuable attribute, closely tied to spiritual energy and illusion techniques. It governed the power of the mind and could shape the intangible into reality. The Nara clan's shadow manipulation techniques and the Yamanaka clan's mind-body jutsu were both examples of yin-based ninjutsu. Even more importantly, the Uchiha clan's Sharingan was also deeply linked to yin release. In the future, it was highly likely that he would obtain a bond related to the Uchiha bloodline. Strengthening his yin release would be crucial for that. However, Yami's gaze fell on the box containing the Kusanagi sword. At this stage, swordsmanship should be his main focus. With his advanced wind-style nature transformation, his attacks would be as lethal as a Jonin's jutsu. And then there was the Jonin-level chakra he had just received. Yami concentrated, carefully sensing it. He estimated that one standard Jonin unit of chakra was roughly 50 times that of a standard Geinin, 5 times that of a standard Chunin. However, it had not yet reached the level of an elite Jonin. That made sense. He needed to keep building his bonds, especially second and third stage bonds, if he wanted to see his strength skyrocket. With that in mind, Yami set himself a new goal, to become the ultimate social butterfly of the ninja world. The next day, Yami went to the academy as usual. After yesterday's incident, where he had used an explosive tag on a target, his name had already spread to the upper grades. Now that people had formed an impression of him, all he needed to do was learn their names, and the initial bonds would be established automatically. After school, Yami accompanied Izumi home for taijutsu training with Ebisu-sensei. Though the tuition was only meant to cover one student, Ebisu didn't dare argue with the Shimura family. He had no choice but to accept Izumi as well. With mother-in-law's expectation enhancing his progress, Yami's improvement rate was nothing short of terrifying. His mastery of Hidden Leaf Village's basic taijutsu had already surpassed that of most recently graduated geinin. If this continued, Ebisu suddenly realized that his job might soon become obsolete. For the first time, he felt a sense of crisis. Meanwhile, Izumi had no such concerns. The little black-haired girl watched Yami with sparkling eyes, full of admiration. Yami is amazing. And what he shows at school isn't even his full strength. I have to work harder, I can't let him leave me behind. Chapter 9, New Teacher. A month passed in the blink of an eye. The leaves on the streets of Hidden Leaf Village had grown greener, and the faint chirping of cicadas signaled the arrival of summer. Inside the Shimura compound, Yami was locked in an intense sparring match with a shinobi. Blades clashed at high speed, leaving only flashes of steel and shadow. Izumi, sitting on the sidelines, couldn't even follow their movements. All she could hear was the crisp sound of swords colliding and see the blurred figures exchanging blows. Yami suddenly lifted his sword, forcing his opponent to lean back to avoid a strike aimed at his throat. However, just as the opponent dodged, Yami's attack shifted. What had seemed like an upward strike transformed into a lateral slash. The flat edge of his blade struck his opponent's arm. Clang! The shinobi's sword slipped from his grasp, clattering to the ground. The match had ended. Yami exhaled, sheathed his blade, and said calmly, "You lost, Nishimura-sensei." His opponent, Nishimura, remained silent for a moment. He was an ordinary member of Root, a Chunin-level shinobi specializing in assassination and swordsmanship. Young Master Yami truly is a genius, Nishimura finally sighed, lowering his head slightly. Throughout the match, he hadn't used his full speed or strength. After all, his opponent was just a 6-year-old child. But his swordsmanship? He had brought it to its peak. Yet, despite only training Yami for 2 weeks, all the techniques he had honed over years of practice had been absorbed and surpassed by this boy. A true genius existed on a completely different level than ordinary shinobi like him. Young Master Yami, Nishimura continued, lowering his head further. I have nothing left to teach you. I will report to Lord Danzō and request a more suitable instructor for you. Thank you, Yami replied with a small nod, watching as Nishimura departed. Then, he turned to Izumi with a smile and beckoned her over. Let's go, I'll walk you home. Izumi eagerly hopped down from her perch, rushed to Yami's side, and took his hand. Hee, Yami, you're amazing. Nishimura-sensei is a Chunin, and you still won. It's just a Chunin. You should set your sights higher, Izumi, Yami said as they walked. There was no arrogance in his tone, just calm understanding. He had learned an important lesson: never judge a ninja's strength based purely on the ranking system seen in the original story. What did it mean to be a geinin? Anyone who mastered the 3 basic jutsus and could use them proficiently could graduate from the academy and become a geinin. Most geinin weren't even qualified to step onto the battlefield, they were mere cannon fodder. Chunin, on the other hand, were squad leaders who possessed stronger combat abilities and could lead teams on missions. According to the system's evaluation, the average Chunin had 10 times the chakra of a standard geinin and could proficiently use B-rank ninjutsu. Defeating an ordinary Chunin in a sword fight? Nothing to brag about. And honestly, even if Nishimura had gone all out, he still wouldn't have stood a chance. Status panel, name, Shimura Yami, gender, male, age, 6 years old, date of birth, April 1st, year 46, Hidden Leaf Village Calendar, Chakra Attributes, Fire, Genius, Wind, Genius, Yang, Excellent, Earth, Good, Water, Good, Yin, Genius, Total Chakra, 1.6 Standard Jonin Chakra, Chakra Control Talent, Genius, Mastered Ninjutsu, 3 Basic Jutsus, Proficient, Wind Style, Great Breakthrough, Proficient, Wind Style, Gale Bomb, Proficient, Fire Style, Great Fireball, Proficient, Fire Style, Blazing Fire, Proficient, Fire Style, Dragon Fire Jutsu, Normal, Nature Transformation, Wind Style, Mastery, Fire Style, Beginner, Strength Evaluation. With those small arms and legs, you can still defeat a Chunin head-on. Recently, Yami hadn't received any major system rewards. Most of his bond rewards had been additional chakra and basic attributes. However, thanks to Izumi's support, his personal training results had been impressive. He had considered asking Izumi to move out of the Uchiha compound, but in the end, he abandoned the idea. At present, the village and Uchiha were not yet at their breaking point. As a child, his words held little influence. Even if he spoke up, Izumi's mother likely wouldn't take him seriously, and his actions might attract unwanted attention from those with ulterior motives. For now, it was best to wait. The Uchiha clan could still hold on for a few more years. At Root headquarters. After leaving Yami's house, Nishimura reported to the Root base and soon stood before Shimura Danzō, kneeling on one knee. Lord Danzō, young Master Yami's swordsmanship has already surpassed mine. I am no longer qualified to be his instructor. So soon? Danzō raised an eyebrow in surprise. I see. You may go. Nishimura bowed and vanished. It seems Yami's talent has exceeded my expectations. Danzō was pleased, but at the same time, slightly troubled. On the one hand, he was delighted by Yami's overwhelming potential. On the other hand, finding a suitable sword instructor for him would be difficult. Currently, there were very few elite swordsmen in Hidden Leaf Village. Murabashi Kosuke was a possibility, but his close ties to the third Hokage made him a problematic choice. Their relationship was strained, and Danzō wasn't confident he could convince Kosuke to teach Yami. The Yamashiro clan? Danzō briefly considered it but quickly dismissed the thought. The Yamashiro family had a renowned sword master among their ranks, but to Danzō, he wasn't significantly stronger than Nishimura. If a shinobi was skilled enough to be recruited into Root, they weren't an ordinary Chunin to begin with. That meant the Yamashiro swordsman likely wouldn't be much of an improvement. The same reasoning applied to the Hazuki clan. Another wasted option. Then, suddenly, a certain figure flashed through Danzō's mind. A young man. Despite his age, he had left a deep impression. His swordsmanship was excellent. And he came from the right background. The only issue was, his identity was sensitive. After a long pause, Danzō made his decision. For Yami, it was worth the risk. The next day, weekend morning, there were no academy classes today, and Yami was just about to leave the house when Danzō unexpectedly returned. Yami, I've found you a new instructor, Danzō said with a rare smile. He's not only skilled in swordsmanship but can also teach you ninjutsu and taijutsu. Who is it? Yami asked curiously. Swish. A breeze blew through the room. A young man suddenly appeared beside Danzō, his presence swift and silent. Yami turned to face him, and his eyes widened in surprise. It was him? Chapter 10, Will of Fire? Hello, my name is Shizue Uchiha. A black-haired boy with a gentle smile appeared in an instant. He looked about 11 or 12 years old, standing just over 1.5 meters tall. But Yami didn't dare to underestimate him. Shizue Uchiha was currently the Uchiha clan's strongest genius. Aside from infinite Tsukaimi, he possessed the most powerful Genjutsu, Kodo Umatsukami. He was also half of Itachi's mentor, the catalyst for Itachi awakening his Mengekyo Sharingan. Now, Yami could only assume that Danzō's brain had been flooded with water style from Hiruzen, considering he had actually allowed Shizue Uchiha to become his teacher. Sure, Shizue had the skill to teach him, but did Danzō seriously think this through? Shimura Danzō, the second greatest anti-Uchiha figure in the ninja world, right after Senjudobi Rama, who had long since passed, was entrusting his grandson's training to Shizue Uchiha. Noticing Yami's puzzled expression, Danzō assumed he was doubting Shizue's abilities. His tone turned serious. Yami, don't underestimate Shizue Uchiha just because he's only a few years older than you. He's a genius of the Uchiha clan. He has completed 8 S-rank missions and more than 20 A-rank missions. He specializes in the body flicker jutsu and kinjutsu. Shinobi from enemy nations call him Shizue of the body flicker. You must learn from him. Hearing Danzō's praise, Yami remained silent. But Shizue scratched his head in embarrassment, looking like an ordinary, good-natured teenager. Danzō-sama, you flatter me. I still have a lot to learn. Danzō glanced at him but said nothing. Still learning? What's the point? You trying to become Hokage or something? Yami sighed internally, accepting the situation. He nodded and said, Shizue-senpai, I'll be in your care from now on. Yami, can I call you that? After receiving a nod, Shizue's smile widened. I'll do my best to teach you everything I know and help you become an outstanding shinobi. And don't call me Shizue-senpai. I'm not that much older than you, just call me by my name. His sincerity was evident. When Danzō had contacted him last night, asking if he was willing to be Yami's instructor, Shizue had agreed without hesitation. Just like Itachi Uchiha. Or rather, as Itachi had learned from him, Shizue had long stopped focusing solely on the Uchiha clan. He looked at things from the perspective of the entire village. Even beyond, from the view of a Kage. Shizue was well aware of the tension between his clan and Hidden Leaf Village, especially now during such a delicate time. Unlike Itachi, however, he still believed that the conflict could be resolved. To him, Danzō's request was a positive signal. A sign that, at the very least, the village was willing to trust him as an Uchiha. Yami's identity was important. He was also close to an Uchiha. Izumi. If he could influence Yami, he might indirectly influence Danzō, using a small starting point to shift the larger situation. Even if it didn't work, at the very least, he could make Danzō understand his stance. Ding. Host and Shizue Uchiha have established a master-disciple bond. Reward dynamic vision, fuse it. As expected, the system notification appeared. Yami was momentarily surprised but quickly accepted the reward. Suddenly, the world in his eyes slowed down. It felt as though he could even track the flow of the wind itself. This sensation only lasted for a brief moment before returning to normal, unnoticed by the other two. You two start training. I have official matters to attend to, Danzō said. After making the introduction, he left the Shimura compound. However, the undercover guards he had brought with him remained behind, closely monitoring Shizue's every move. Danzō had his reasons. By selecting Shizue, Uchiha aligned with Hidden Leaf Village's interests, he could temporarily lull the Uchiha clan into a false sense of security, making it seem as though the village had no intention of taking action against them. At the same time, ensuring Yami's safety was a priority. The two Jonin-level guards stationed nearby served as insurance, preventing any possibility of Shizue brainwashing Yami, or worse, outright attacking him. These high-level political players always had ulterior motives. A seemingly simple decision could carry 800 different calculations. In the courtyard. Yami, where do you want to start? Shizue asked gently. Danzō-sama mentioned that you have fire and wind style. Uchiha specializes in fire style, and we also have sword techniques that incorporate it. Shizue-senpai, I have something else to take care of this morning. Let's start training in the afternoon. If you want, you can come with me, Yami said. Where to? Shizue asked curiously. Half an hour later, Hidden Leaf Village Orphanage. Shizue stood at the entrance of a modest building. Hidden Leaf Village Orphanage? Come in, Yami said, waving him forward. Behind them, several shinobi carrying large supply packages followed them inside. The orphanage was located at the edge of the village. It wasn't particularly large, just a 3-story building with a courtyard about half the size of a football field. A bespectacled woman in her early 30s stood in the yard, playing with a group of 4- and 5-year-old children. She had a gentle smile, but her expression changed slightly when she saw Yami and the others approaching. Still, she quickly walked over to greet them. Little boy. What brings you here? She instinctively sensed that this 6-year-old was the leader of the group, so she addressed him directly. Are you Director Nano? Yami asked with a bright smile. My name is Shimura Yami. I'm Hiraki's classmate. I heard the orphanage has been struggling, sometimes even running out of food. So I brought some supplies. Shimura-kun. A boy Yami's age ran over. His face was full of gratitude, but no second stage bond notification appeared. Nano's pupils contracted slightly, though her expression remained well controlled. She smiled at the right moment. Thank you so much, Shimura-kun. It's nothing. My family has plenty of money, Yami said casually. Nano's lips twitched slightly. Meanwhile, Shizue, who had remained silent until now, looked at the small boy standing in front of him. His expression shifted slightly. Such a kind-hearted child. Thinking of others at such a young age. Was this the will of fire? Chapter 11, Serve them red pepper. The children at the orphanage enjoyed a rare feast. Naturally, Yami's gifts were not ordinary. Most of the food he brought consisted of various meats, a luxury for the orphans of Hidden Leaf Village's orphanage. Typically, they only had the chance to eat meat 2 or 3 times a month, and even then, the portions were small. So today's meal was truly a special treat. However, Yami himself wasn't in the best mood. His expression remained dark, and he spoke less and less. Is the food not to your liking? Nano cautiously observed his demeanor. I'm very sorry. The orphanage's chef isn't very skilled. If she were just an ordinary orphanage director, she wouldn't need to be so careful, even if Yami had donated valuable supplies. But unfortunately, being the orphanage director was only Nano's official identity. She also had another role. Yakushi Nano. An elite root operative. A spy who had completed countless dangerous missions, earning the title Wandering Maiko. Most of the orphans in the orphanage possessed the potential to become shinobi, making them a valuable reserve force for Root. Nano was well aware of Danzō's ruthlessness. Yami was his last remaining relative, meaning she had to tread carefully. If she made a misstep and earned his resentment, her plans for retirement would be utterly ruined. That was why she paid such close attention to his mood swings. It's nothing. Yami shook his head slightly, quickly finishing the food in his bowl. He then placed his chopsticks down and said, Director Nano, I have training this afternoon, so I won't stay much longer. As he stood up, Shizue also stopped his conversation with the children. Yami walked over and looked at the white-haired boy who had been chatting with Shizue earlier. What's your name? Kabuto, the white-haired boy answered softly, gratitude evident in his eyes. Alright, Kabuto, I'll come to see you next time. Yami smiled, then left with Shizue and the shinobi who had accompanied him. After spending half a day at the orphanage, Yami had interacted with nearly 200 orphans. However, aside from Nano, only 20 children had formed a bond with him and granted rewards. No wonder he wasn't pleased. Most of those 20 had basic chakra, and only a few had unique chakra attributes. If the rewards from Nano and Kabuto weren't decent, he would have been even more frustrated. Host has established a vigilance bond with Yakushi Nano, obtaining chakra control talent. Excellent. Host has established a gratitude bond with Yakushi Kabuto, obtaining chakra control talent. Genius. Chakra control talent might seem minor, but in reality, it was incredibly important. Tree climbing and water walking were just the most basic training exercises. The real challenge lay in accurately regulating chakra output during battle. In game terms, chakra was equivalent to mana. Having a large mana pool allowed for the use of more jutsu, but it didn't determine the strength of those techniques. A jutsu's power depended on multiple factors: the amount of chakra infused into the technique, the user's mastery of nature transformation, the inherent strength of the jutsu itself. Chakra control not only affected the maximum output of a single jutsu but also determined one's ability to learn high-level techniques. Take Naruto Uzumaki's Wind style, Rasen Shuriken, for example. It required exceptional chakra control and advanced nature transformation mastery to even attempt. After integrating these rewards, Yami's chakra control talent hadn't reached the ultimate level, but it had improved significantly. Aside from Tsunade, his chakra control talent was now likely the best in the entire shinobi world. Yami returned to the Shimura clan estate to train with Shizue. Since it was the first day, there was no structured training yet. Shizue simply had Yami go all out against him, using every technique at his disposal, so he could assess his level. Without revealing his hidden nature transformations, Yami displayed his full strength. This impressed Shizue repeatedly. At Yami's age, Shizue himself had been much weaker. His rapid growth only began after awakening the Sharingan. Especially in Kenjutsu. No wonder Danzō had specifically asked him to mentor Yami. As the sun set, the afternoon of training quickly came to an end. Standing at the entrance, Shizue smiled at Yami. Yami, I'll bring the Uchiha clan's Kenjutsu scroll tomorrow. As for the body flicker jutsu, I'll teach it to you once your swordsmanship reaches a bottleneck. What do you think? Yami nodded. I'll follow your guidance, Shizue-senpai. It was clear that Shizue was genuinely investing in him. Not only was he willing to pass down Uchiha Kenjutsu, but he also intended to teach him the signature body flicker jutsu that had earned him fame. After watching Shizue leave, Izumi, who had been starving, thought she could finally eat. However, she was soon pulled along by Yami, who bought a massive quantity of green peppers from the market. He then had Aburame Seiji and Yamanaka Ryo carry them to the orphanage. Under Nano's puzzled gaze, Yami, acting like a spoiled young master, ordered the orphanage's chef to stop preparing dinner and instead serve an all-green pepper banquet. In Hidden Leaf Village, green peppers were one of the most hated foods. Both by children and many adults. Not only did they have a strong, distinct smell, but many found their taste unbearable, similar to how some people despised cilantro. To make matters worse, most of Hidden Leaf Village's cooking methods involved boiling or steaming them plainly. Even if someone could tolerate the smell, the taste was atrocious. The green peppers Yami had bought were essentially the entire market's stock. Dish after dish of green peppers was served. As Nano lectured the children about the nutritional benefits of green peppers, they forced themselves to swallow the bitter meal, their expressions filled with agony. Seeing this, Yami grinned and announced loudly, "Don't worry. I'll bring even more green peppers next week. Eat them without hesitation." Wah! Finally, a young child couldn't hold back and burst into tears. It was like a chain reaction. Soon, wails and cries echoed throughout the orphanage. Nano and the caregivers scrambled to comfort the distraught children, while Yamanaka Ryo and Aburame Seiji's faces twitched uncontrollably. Their young master was truly wicked. As expected of Danzō's grandson. Yami chuckled in satisfaction. Congratulations, host. Chapter 12. Hatred is the way forward. After the green pepper feast, the orphanage was in an uproar, and Yami achieved exactly what he wanted. More than 100 bonds reached the first stage instantly. The system notifications came so rapidly that he could barely keep up, and some even provided 2 rewards at once. A realization dawned upon him. People rarely remember kindness, but hatred? Hatred leaves a deep impression. If he wanted to establish bonds with everyone, the fastest way wasn't by befriending them. That was impossible. But making them feel disgusted, fearful, or even hateful. Only emotions like hatred could unite even the 5 great nations in mutual understanding. Yami suddenly felt a twinge of regret. If he had Danzō's reputation and the fear he commanded, not to mention his ability to shift blame, then the rewards he could obtain from these bonds might have already made him invincible in the ninja world. Kabuto silently observed Yami. One moment, he was smiling, the next, his face returned to its usual indifference. Kabuto felt a strange sense of unease. This kid was terrifyingly unpredictable. Host has reached the second stage of the bond with Yakushi Kabuto. Reward, special talent, scientific research ability. Yami snapped out of his thoughts and glanced at Kabuto. What was this kid thinking about? How did he suddenly reach the second stage? At the Ninja Academy, Kazama Shuichi stood before the class with a serious expression. Tomorrow, we will hold this year's final exam. This test will assess everything you've learned over the past year and consists of 2 parts, a written test in the morning and a practical test in the afternoon. The third Hokage will also be present to observe your performance. As soon as he finished speaking, the classroom erupted into chatter. The Hokage is coming? I've only seen him at the entrance ceremony. This is awesome. If I do well and get praised by the Hokage, my parents won't dare to scold me anymore. Although the ideological indoctrination wasn't as intense yet, the third Hokage had ruled for over 20 years, and his prestige in the village was unmatched. The mere mention of his presence had the students excited. Even Itachi straightened his posture subconsciously. Kazama Shuichi remained patient, waiting for the excitement to die down before continuing. I hope all of you will perform your best. If anyone fails, their homework for next semester will be doubled. The noisy classroom instantly fell silent. The mischievous kids immediately sat up straight, and Shuichi dismissed the class. As usual, Yami walked home with Izumi. He wasn't particularly concerned about the third Hokage's visit. Besides maintaining his presence and reinforcing his reputation, he knew that Hiruzen was most likely coming for Itachi. Every Uchiha genius caused unease within the village. Itachi wasn't just a genius. He was also the clan leader's son. Of course, Hiruzen would take an interest in him. Izumi, I plan to graduate after this exam. Huh? The little girl, who was enjoying a box of Chibi Maruko snacks, froze in surprise before growing anxious. Graduate early? Then I want to graduate early too. Having trained with Yami every day, Izumi knew his strength well. Forget just graduating. He was already strong enough to be a chunin. Even she had reached the level of a graduate. For some reason, whenever she trained with Yami, her mind felt sharper, and her progress skyrocketed compared to practicing at home. She had already mastered the 3 basic jutsus and learned 2 fire-style jutsu. Her only weakness was chakra capacity. Of course, that was only in comparison to adult shinobi. As an Uchiha, even without awakening her Sharingan, Izumi's chakra reserves far exceeded that of ordinary people. She was at least at the level of a Genin. Izumi, you can't graduate yet. Yami stopped and looked at her seriously. The war isn't over. Even if you don't go to the battlefield, the missions you'd be assigned will still be dangerous. If you graduate in 2 years, things will be much better. Then stay in school with me. Izumi pouted, tension in her expression at the mention of war. We can graduate together after it's over. Izumi, I can't learn anything by staying in school, it would just be a waste of time. And don't worry about my safety. The village won't assign me anything too dangerous. After much persuasion, Yami finally convinced Izumi to give up on graduating early. Right now, He could barely protect himself, he had no extra energy to look after Izumi as well. If he stayed in school, he wouldn't be able to interact with more shinobi or form new bonds. He wouldn't be able to reach the second stage of his mother's legacy and elevate his talent. So, he had to graduate. Otherwise, he'd be stuck in the academy, repeating grades until he eventually graduated with Hanabi. Meanwhile, in the Uchiha district, in a small forest, several large trees were lined with targets. Itachi Uchiha, who had been practicing his shuriken techniques, suddenly stopped, as if processing some new information. After a moment, he opened his eyes again. Final exam. The third Hokage. After absorbing the knowledge from his shadow clone's report, Itachi showed no particular reaction and simply returned to training. Only when the scent of dinner filled the air did he finally gather his ninja tools and head home. Brother. Brother. A small figure wobbled out of the house. A gentle smile appeared on Itachi Uchiha's face as he took 2 quick steps forward and picked him up. Sasuke. Brother, hug me. Alright, come here. Holding little Sasuke, Itachi felt this was the happiest part of his day. A gentle voice called from the kitchen. Itachi, you're back? Go wash your hands and get ready for dinner. And help Sasuke wash up too. Got it, Mom. Carrying Sasuke, Itachi headed to the bathroom. That evening, during dinner, Fugaku Uchiha brought up the final exam. I heard the third Hokage will be visiting the school. Make sure you perform well and don't disgrace the Uchiha name. Yes. Itachi gave a calm nod as he carefully removed the bones from his fish and placed small pieces into Sasuke's mouth. That was the end of their conversation. No one in the household considered a simple exam to be worth much attention.